disciple of Orochimaru, the evil scientist from Naruto. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51, Golden-haired Orochimaru. Of course not Zabuza. Zabuza was just a renegade ninja, a wandering ninja. How much money could he possibly have? Amemiya Kenichi was targeting Kado, who had hired Zabuza to carry out the mission. Kado was one of the world's wealthiest men at the time, and he must have had a considerable fortune, a considerable asset. However, that was a matter of the future. Amemiya Kenichi wasn't sure if Kado had reached that level yet. He could check back when he needed money. With the empty ring, Amemiya Kenichi left. Konan said he would provide the clothes later, and even needed to take Kenichi's measurements, quite a meticulous one. After Amemiya Kenichi left, Konan and Nagato returned to the Akatsuki Tower. Nagato, are you really confident in letting these two Konoha renegade ninja join us? Konan asked Nagato, handing him two rings. Remember, Akatsuki was pursuing an elite strategy, so the number of rings was limited, and now two were gone at once. Ahem. It's okay. They're quite capable, but I'm not feeling any pressure. Nagato shook his head. The Akatsuki organization was now comprised of only a few members. Forget executing future plans. Simply growing it was a challenge. Only after becoming the true leader of an organization could one truly understand how difficult it was to manage. Furthermore, many future plans required funding, so they could only recruit capable renegade ninjas and send them on missions. I heard there's a bounty hunter named Kakuzu, Nagato said, looking at Konan. Akatsuki's growth required both time and money, and Kakuzu was Nagato's first target. He hadn't expected the two Konoha renegade ninjas to actually seek them out and join them, unexpectedly becoming the first members of Akatsuki. I see, Konan said, understanding his friend's meaning. It looked like things were going to get busy for a while. Amemiya Kenichi was running. Besides the Akatsuki, there wasn't much else to focus on in the Land of Rain, so he planned to return as soon as possible to report his mission to his teacher. Kenichi Amemiya showed no sign of stopping, dashing along at full speed until he reached the border of the Land of Fire. Only then did he slow down, carefully checking for any patrolling ninja nearby, and finally slip inside. By this time, half a month had passed since Kenichi Amemiya had left to carry out his teacher's assignment. The ninja world remained much the same, but Kenichi Amemiya noticed that the number of ninja patrolling the Land of Fire border seemed to have decreased. This wasn't normal. Patrolling the border was crucial, and they wouldn't be deployed unless something serious was happening. Could it be that another ninja village, seeing the death of the Yondaime and the defection of myself and my teacher, is trying to test the village's strength? Kenichi Amemiya stroked his chin, feeling the possibility was high. After all, this opportunity was incredibly rare. With the Yondaime's death, the village having suffered several attacks, and the defection of myself and my teacher, Konoha was now extremely weakened. I wonder how Yuki is doing now? Kenichi Amemiya moved swiftly through the woods. Having acquired the 3 Magneto Sharingan, Kenichi Amemiya's speed had increased considerably. Kenichi Amemiya even thought he might be able to try learning the Flying Thunder God technique, given his improved dynamic vision. However, for now, Kenichi Amemiya planned to return to base first and discuss the Akatsuki with his teacher. As for whether his teacher would agree, Kenichi Amemiya wasn't worried. After all, just mentioning Pain's Eye would surely intrigue him. It was the Rinnegan, the legendary Eye of the Immortal. Therefore, Kenichi Amemiya wasn't worried his teacher would refuse to join the Akatsuki, especially given the numerous benefits. Beyond that, the mystical ninjutsu, the mysterious bloodline, and the evil deity worshipped by Hidden all intrigued Kenichi Amemiya. However, Kenichi Amemiya knew he couldn't bite off more than he bit off more, so he decided to study each one piece at a time. He could also learn the multiple shadow clones technique from his teacher later, which would accelerate his research. It was truly a magical technique, and in Kenichi Amemiya's opinion, it was far superior to other ninjutsu. How much time could a few like-minded companions save? Furthermore, even after the clones disbanded, their experiences and memories could be transferred back to the original body, a truly remarkable feat. Simply put, even if one had used this jutsu in a previous life, with a bit of dressing up, they could have worked dozens of jobs and raked in a fortune. Of course, figuring out their identities was also a problem, as was fatigue. After another 2 or 3 days, Kenichi Amemiya finally reached the entrance to the long-missed laboratory. After opening the door as instructed by his teacher, he quickly entered, closing the door behind him. Mission completed. A crisp voice echoed, and Kenichi Amemiya was taken aback. Why did the voice sound familiar? He rubbed his chin, then remembered that it had been the same voice during the previous excitement. Teacher? Kenichi Amemiya thought to himself. Could it be that, while he was away on a mission, his teacher had mastered the jutsu of reincarnation, successfully transferring his soul into the body of this female ninja? How's the investigation going? Under the dim light, a petite figure emerged. She bore Yuka's face, yet she felt familiar to Kenichi Amemiya. This must be his teacher, Orochimaru. Apparently, he'd mastered the art of reincarnation, having been reincarnated while he was out investigating the rain village. Well, something happened in the land of the rain. The demigod Hanzo died. Kenichi Amemiya's expression was a bit strange. Although he knew the figure before him was his teacher, Orochimaru, the contrast was truly stark. Kenichi Amemiya remembered his teacher's disguise, didn't he? Why not now? Instead, he chose a kunoichi's natural appearance. In the dim light, Kenichi Amemiya could see the kunoichi's large eyes, cherry-like mouth, fair complexion, and lovely features. Kenichi Amemiya swallowed. Yuki also had soft blonde hair, which was a big plus. Chapter 52. So is it wrong to give a ring to a girl? Hanzo? That guy was incredibly powerful and had a strong poison skill. How could he? Orochimaru was stunned, clearly having not expected the changes in the land of rain to be due to Hanzo's death. But then another question struck her. Kenichi, how did you know? Orochimaru looked at her disciple. Although she had to look up at Kenichi Amemiya due to her current state of reincarnation, her gaze remained as oppressive as ever. She hadn't even heard of Hanzo's death, so how did her disciple know? Furthermore, even the Rain Village wouldn't casually announce the death of their leader. There weren't many powerful figures in the Rain Village, and Hanzo was the only one. The death of such a figure must be carefully concealed, as leaking it would attract the attention of other jackals, a dangerous matter. Because I joined an organization there, and their leader, Pain, told me. Kenichi Amemiya raised his hand, revealing a ring. Orochimaru took a look. The ring had the word Jade inscribed on it, and the design was quite novel. Organization? Leader? Orochimaru's eyes grew menacing. His disciple seemed to have grown up. Teacher, you'll definitely be interested, because the leader's eyes are like the eyes of a sage. Amemiya, Kenichi said excitedly. He knew Orochimaru would be interested in Pain. After all, those were the sage's Rinnegan. Amemiya Kenichi had seen his teacher studying ancient texts before. One of them depicted the Six Paths Sage, and the circles of lines in his eyes were particularly eye-catching. Rinnegan? Orochimaru clearly knew more about the ancient secrets than Amemiya Kenichi had imagined. She narrowed her eyes. If that was true, then the organization was indeed very interesting. Orochimaru had always thought the Rinnegan was just some ancient boast about the Six Paths Sage, but he had never imagined it actually existed. Tell me about your mission this time, Orochimaru said, using Earth Escape to create 2 simple chairs. He sat on them and looked at Amemiya Kenichi. She was very interested. Kenichi Amemiya also honestly explained his itinerary. His expression was a little awkward, though. Since Orochimaru wasn't paying much attention to his posture, Kenichi could vaguely see something unsettling. Kenichi Amemiya, you've fallen so low. You're embarrassed about something like this? Kenichi Amemiya felt like slapping him. What was there to be embarrassed about? While the blonde girl before him was certainly adorable, the problem was that she was also Orochimaru. She was his teacher, the one who loved playing with snakes. This wasn't just a game where he said his teammates played with snakes. Orochimaru really did. Akatsuki? I've heard of it before, but then there were rumors they were wiped out. But now it seems that's not the case. Orochimaru narrowed his eyes, chin resting on his hand as he pondered. She had heard of this organization before, active in the Land of Rain, with dreams so childish and ridiculous. At least Orochimaru found it ridiculous. After all, he knew well how naive and almost impossible it was to pursue peace in the ninja world. However, the other party seemed to have some connection to that idiot Jiraiya. By the way, Sensei, Akatsuki has also invited you, Amemiya, Kenichi thought, remembering something he had almost forgotten. He pulled the empty ring from his pocket and casually handed it to his teacher. Oh, that's interesting, Orochimaru smiled, then took it and slipped it onto his finger. Amemiya, Kenichi scratched his head. Why did this seem so strange? After all, he was only giving his teacher a token of the Akatsuki, but the action just now was like putting a ring on him. Orochimaru didn't think too much of it. She had originally planned to establish her own organization in a nearby small country and continue her research, but now she had found a new destination, Akatsuki. Orochimaru had no opinion of the organization that had been destroyed due to its naivety. She was simply intrigued by the leader's Rinnegan. After all, it was known as the Sage's Eye, and Orochimaru coveted its power. You've done very well, Kenichi. Didn't you say you wanted some materials? I've got them for you, and they're in lab 3. Orochimaru looked at his student with satisfaction. He was very pleased with his student's performance. He had only intended to send him off and complete his own reincarnation, but he hadn't expected such a reward. Furthermore, to test his student's loyalty, she had even used this body to confront Kenichi Amemiya, hoping to see if he had any other ideas. So far, it seemed quite good. At least he hadn't shown any disrespect, nor had he tested her current abilities. Thank you, Sensei. Kenichi Amemiya was instantly excited. He had previously asked his teacher for some materials for thermobaric bombs, and he hadn't expected him to actually get them. Those things weren't cheap. It's okay. By the way, Kenichi, you see my body now, right? Orochimaru looked at Kenichi Amemiya with a serious expression. You see, Sensei, what's going on? Kenichi Amemiya knew what was going on, but he certainly couldn't show it directly, so he feigned complete confusion. He originally thought that the teacher was not going to explain this problem. This is the ninjutsu I developed, the reincarnation technique. If you want to learn it later, I can also teach you, Orochimaru said with a smile. Amemiya Kenichi was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect the teacher to say it so straightforwardly, which surprised him a little. But then Amemiya Kenichi thought of some experiments he had taken over before, and he had seen such a sentence in the log above. After the transfer, the body and soul may be greatly weakened due to fusion problems. The words, okay, teacher, but I'm still young and can't use it for the time being, Amemiya Kenichi said with a smile. He suspected that the teacher was testing him, and even suspected that the sentence he saw in Konoha was also deliberately arranged by the teacher. Calling Orochimaru here is mainly to distinguish them, otherwise he might confuse the two. There is absolutely no other meaning. Chapter 53, Detonating Talisman, From Beginner to Master. I've seen the thermobaric bomb design. I have all the materials. We can make thermobaric explosives, but the problem is the ratio, said Kenichi Amemiya, surveying his blueprint in the laboratory. This blueprint was the one he had obtained for the thermobaric bomb. While all the other key steps were present, the ratio for the thermobaric explosives was missing. Kenichi Amemiya rubbed his chin. He had only seen thermobaric bombs in movies and television, and certainly had never come into contact with them in real life. However, he knew they were highly destructive, especially against underground structures and the personnel within. Kenichi Amemiya suspected that the jungle tunnel warfare had caused PTSD in the Westerners, leading them to develop this weapon specifically. However, the power of thermobaric bombs was undeniable. In previous lives, they were among the most powerful conventional weapons, excluding nuclear weapons, of course. But there's no ratio. Could it be because of chakra considerations? Kenichi Amemiya pondered. What was the biggest difference between the ninja world and the past? The energy involved was naturally chakra, and to Kenichi Amemiya, chakra was a very advanced energy. Looking at those incredible ninjutsu, it was arguably chakra that made the world so magical. Then there was the power of the eyes, something completely unexplainable in his previous life. It could even drag down meteorites. which was absurd. So, after receiving the design drawings for the thermobaric bomb, Kenichi Amemiya pondered a question. Could chakra be integrated into the bomb? And if that were truly possible, could the power of the eyes also be incorporated into the bomb in the future? What kind of weapon would that create? Kenichi Amemiya was deeply curious. However, he had no idea how to combine chakra with thermobaric bombs, so he decided to look elsewhere for ideas. I remember there should be detonating talisman, from beginner to mastery here, Kenichi Amemiya said, looking through the adjacent information area. He then pulled out a book. A detonating tag. What it was, needless to say, essentially sealed a fire-style ninjutsu within a specific piece of paper, making it easy to carry and use. It wasn't difficult to manipulate. Then there were the tailed beast sealing talismans and even the ninjutsu talismans, demonstrating that even in the ninja world, it was possible to seal ninjutsu, even sealing and ninjutsu, within paper. So, Amemiya Kenichi planned to first research how to make a detonating tag, and then, by analogy, experiment with creating his own chakra thermobaric bomb. Orochimaru watched his busy disciple running around, and took a sip of tea. This disciple had a pretty good character. At least, even after realizing she was weak, she didn't want to betray her master and ancestors, but instead pursued her own research. Of course, she wasn't actually weak at all. After her disciple left, she immediately sealed her laboratory and performed the reincarnation technique. Initially, she'd felt a slight weakening in her soul, but now she was much better, and her strength had almost fully recovered. If Amemiya Kenichi were to strike, she would ruthlessly eliminate the entire group. Akatsuki, the Rinnegan, is the eye of a sage, said to possess extremely powerful abilities. Orochimaru toyed with the ring on his finger. However, after glancing at his own body, he felt a wave of irritation. His research on the reincarnation of the dead had run into a problem. For unknown reasons, while he was performing the reincarnation, the subject suddenly trembled all over. The experimental requirements were extremely strict, and even though the subject's trembling was merely a brief one, it affected his own reincarnation. Orochimaru now realized that he seemed to be slightly affected by the subject's memories. He had almost completely erased them, but after the trembling, some insignificant memories resurfaced. Fortunately, this didn't affect her disguise as her former self. Meeting her disciples in that form had been a test. Now that the test was over, she could naturally return to her former self. Soon, Orochimaru's former appearance was completely gone, though he had become a little shorter, though not noticeably so. Orochimaru, welcome to the Akatsuki. Suddenly, a sudden voice rang out, and Orochimaru felt his vision darken, and then she was standing in a strange place. Orochimaru turned his head and looked. The place was dark, and it seemed she hadn't come in her true form, but a different one. Captain Pain, what is this jutsu? Amemiya Kenichi had also been pulled over. Although he had seen it before in Naruto, experiencing it firsthand was quite novel. This is the jutsu we are discussing at our Akatsuki meeting. Since this is our first time, we didn't notify you. We'll notify you next time, and then bring you over, Pain said expressionlessly. In reality, he had pulled them over directly this time to demonstrate his strength, a small act of intimidation. After all, these two Konoha rebels were attending an Akatsuki meeting for the first time, even though he had come up with the idea himself. Oh, it's the Rinnegan. After all. Orochimaru glanced at the figure in front of him. The other person's eyes were striking in the darkness. Those rippled eyes were unforgettable. From now on, use your names when communicating within the organization. Pain ignored Orochimaru's question, confident in his own abilities. Okay, Pain, Amemiya Kenichi said with a smile. Sister Xiaonan, can my clothes be made more handsome? It would be better if they were windbreakers. Amemiya Kenichi looked at another participant. Nagato took a deep breath. What's the matter with suddenly wanting to kick you out? Orochimaru didn't say anything, but watched from the side with his hands folded. The clothes of the organization are all the same, at most the sizes are different. Xiaonan held it in for a while, and then replied. It was the first time she met someone who cared about clothes. What's the use of being handsome? Does it help in battle? Xiaonan couldn't understand. I think we can add something to distinguish them. For example, Amemiya Kenichi said with a smile, and then noticed Pain beside him out of the corner of his eye. Enough. You. Nagato couldn't bear it anymore. Amemiya Kenichi shrugged and then made a zippering motion. Thanks to the Dark Star Emperor for the 1000 starting coins and thanks to Hixio for the 500 starting coins. Chapter 54 The Conclusion of the World Line. I called you here mainly to explain Akatsuki's future mission. Nagato took a deep breath. He'd just about lost control and wanted to kick Tamaki out. Fortunately, this guy hadn't continued to provoke him, otherwise Nagato would have been unable to bear it. Amemiya Kenichi shrugged, perhaps understanding what Nagato meant. Akatsuki wasn't the superpower it once was, the one that later drew interest from the ninja world. Currently, it's just a handful of small organizations. They need to constantly recruit new members, accumulate funds for activities, purchase necessary supplies, and so on. It's fair to say that Akatsuki is currently in a state of disrepair. There's so much to do: recruit suitable targets, accumulate funds for the organization, and perhaps even prepare detonating tags for Konan. Amemiya Kenichi glanced at Konan, who was standing beside Nagato. Detonating tags are incredibly expensive, and the number of detonating tags Konan had was a bit outrageous. Perhaps Konan possessed some special ability? Otherwise, even Kakuzu, no matter how hard he worked, wouldn't be able to keep up. Sora, I hope you can raise some funds quickly. Any method is acceptable, but no harm to civilians. Nagato glanced at Orochimaru. He had already sensed something was off about Orochimaru before him a bit shorter, but he had no intention of questioning. As long as he could complete the mission assigned to him, he had no desire to interfere with the Akatsuki members. No harm to civilians? Okay, but I want to study your Rinnegan. Orochimaru licked his lips, gazing dangerously at Nagato. Amemiya Kenichi covered his face but came anyway. Although he had previously specifically helped his teacher join the Akatsuki and obtained the ring, he hadn't expected his teacher to still have such provocative thoughts. Amemiya Kenichi vaguely remembered that in the anime, Orochimaru seemed to attack Nagato first, only to be defeated before joining the Akatsuki. He had thought he had avoided this, but it hadn't occurred to him that it would turn out this way. You can try. Nagato's voice remained calm, as if Orochimaru's provocation had no effect on him. Konan, however, was furious. But after Nagato glanced at her, Konan said nothing. She simply folded her arms and stared at Orochimaru, her displeasure written all over her face. I'll try. Orochimaru licked his lips, his long tongue making Kenichi Amemiya shiver. The teacher really did enjoy playing with snakes. He was quite audacious, but remembering how he'd been tempted to dig out the Rinnegan for a search the first time he'd seen Nagato, Kenichi Amemiya could understand his teacher. I'm one of a kind. Kenichi Amemiya smacked his lips. Tama, your mission. Nagato ignored Orochimaru, believing he'd let him experience the power of the sage's eyes. He looked at Kenichi Amemiya. Nagato was determined to get rid of this troublesome guy, Kenichi Amemiya. He felt he'd be pissed off if he kept him around. Making money, right? Kenichi Amemiya gave a thumbs up, then flashed a smile that matched K's. Nagato suddenly felt that this guy's smile was so dazzling, it seemed to reflect light. Yes. However, he was already very satisfied that Kenichi Amemiya could go out obediently. It seems that he, as a leader, is still very majestic. Yahiko, it turns out that only you can become the leader of Akatsuki. I will finish it as soon as possible. Kenichi Amemiya did not say anything to Nagato immediately. After all, he had just joined the organization, and completing a task first was considered as paying his tribute. Well, then it's decided. There may be other members joining later. I will notify you when the time comes. Nagato waved his hand, and the next second Kenichi Amemiya returned to the experimental base. Kenichi Amemiya looked around. It must be said that this ability is really useful and very hidden. No wonder Akatsuki has always been the deepest hidden organization in the ninja world. Of course, it is not the deepest hidden person. Kenichi Amemiya thinks that the deepest hidden person should be Black Zetsu. It seems that there is also a member of the Otsutsuki clan hiding in the ninja world. He can be said to be an old silver coin. Kenichi, please complete my mission as well. I'm going to the rain village. Teacher Orochimaru suddenly appeared before Kenichi Amemiya and licked his lips. Kenichi Amemiya scratched his head as he looked at his teacher, now in his original form. Although he knew his true appearance, he had to admit that his previous appearance was more pleasing to the eye. But a teacher is still a teacher, and Kenichi Amemiya knew that his previous appearance was more of a test. What if I touch his head? Kenichi Amemiya looked at his teacher's head, lost in thought. He had previously tested Yuki with the scientific experiment of Pavlov's dog. Back then, whenever he touched Yuki's head, Yuki would tremble all over. He didn't know if the same thing would happen now. However, considering the dire consequences of touching his teacher's head, Kenichi Amemiya gave up the idea. Orochimaru saw that Ken Amemiya hadn't responded for a long time, and his brows furrowed. This made Ken Amemiya focus on his teacher's previous words. Okay, teacher. Amemiya. Kenichi scratched his head. It was a shame. His research hadn't even begun yet, and the thermobaric explosives were still in the experimental stage of preparation. He had to give up on it for now, but he had already considered where to get the money. Kado was a very good choice. Although Kado was an ordinary person, judging by his subsequent behavior in the Land of Waves, Amemiya Kenichi felt that, even if he killed Kado, Nagato wouldn't mind. While the Akatsuki organization was committed to peace in the ninja world, and was more pro-civilian, necessary sacrifices were also tolerated within the Akatsuki. And for someone like Kado, Amemiya Kenichi didn't think Nagato would sympathize with him. Teacher, are you planning to test Pain's strength? Amemiya Kenichi couldn't help but ask. Yes, I want to see what the Rinnegan is capable of. Orochimaru's eyes looked excited, and Amemiya Kenichi felt a little excited too. That was the Rinnegan, an eye of immense power. If the main Gekyo was a youthful version, then the Rinnegan was a supercharged version, a completely different beast. Wait for me, Obito. After I finish making the chakra temperature pressure bullet, you definitely don't mind helping me verify the power of this weapon, right? Kenichi Amemiya touched his ceiling scroll, and there was a Mangekyou Sharingan inside, Obito's Mangekyou Sharingan. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55, Fall Down. Thunder Dragon. Are you talking about the Kado Company? A drunken man looked at Kenichi Amemiya with a dazed look, his breath thick with alcohol making him lean back. Yes, where is the Kado Company? Kenichi Amemiya asked again, a little disdainful. He had already arrived in the Land of Waves, but to his surprise, he didn't find the Kado Company there. This left Kenichi somewhat bewildered. Could it be that the Kado Company hadn't yet extended its reach into the Land of Waves? No, hiccup. I've never heard of it. The man burped, then collapsed onto the table, snoring. Kenichi Amemiya scratched his head. It seemed something had changed, but upon reflection, it didn't seem surprising. Naruto was only born now, but by the time he accepted the mission to the Land of Waves and arrived there, he would have been 12 years old. This meant that more than 11 years had passed before Naruto's debut. 11 years was enough time for things to change, for people in the world to have undergone tremendous changes. It was a mistake. Amemiya Kenichi shook his head. At that time, the Kado Company might not have arrived in the Land of Waves yet, and even whether Kado would become the future tycoon of the ninja world was a question. This was the trouble with no internet. If there were, searching for this information wouldn't be so difficult. But without it, even finding the richest person in a region would be difficult. Forget it, let's gather some information. While we're at it, Amemiya Kenichi shook his head, then pricked the man's hand with a needle to collect some blood. Amemiya Kenichi planned to use his time out to gather more genetic information for future use. Chakra didn't exist in the ninja world before. It only emerged after Kaguya Satsuki planted the sacred tree. But even before the Satsuki, the ninja world seemed to have its own indigenous gods and strange entities. For example, the evil deity worshipped by Hidden and the god of death from the Land of Whirlpools. So, perhaps there was some hidden information in people's genes. We can also collect some of these plants. Amemiya Kenichi casually plucked a fruit from a nearby tree. A man rushed over angrily. However, the money casually thrown over by Amemiya Kenichi turned his anger into a fawning smile. Amemiya Kenichi considered using his Sharingan to hypnotize him, but considering that would be a waste of talent, he simply settled for a small sum. Strolling through the streets of Wave Country, Amemiya Kenichi observed the civilians living peaceful lives, and scratched his head. Now that Kado was gone, these people's lives seemed much simpler. People came and went on the streets under a dark cloud, most of them wearing little clothing, a stark reminder of a small fishing village. Deep poverty was evident. This was a country entirely dependent on fishing for survival, and with no trace of ninjas. If Amemiya Kenichi had wanted to, he could even establish his own ninja village here, but he saw no need. What was the point of establishing a ninja village in this place? To have these ordinary people catch fish for him? And then call himself what? Fish Shadow? Telling anyone about it would probably make many people laugh. Even this unfortunate place didn't have a single daimyo, which disappointed Kenichi Amemiya. If there were a daimyo, he'd be able to find someone much faster. Forget it, let's go to the port and see if there's still one. Kenichi Amemiya touched his chin. If he couldn't find anyone even then he'd just have to go to the far country to beg for money. There were plenty of wealthy people there anyway. Perhaps it was luck, though. As soon as Kenichi Amemiya arrived at the port, he saw a ship with the Kado Company logo printed on it, with some people busy working on it. Boom. There was a loud bang, and lightning flashed across the sky. A storm was brewing. The sudden thunder also caused a worker's hand to tremble, drawing angry curses from the people on the boat. You peasants. Be careful. That's going to the water country for those big wigs to enjoy. Looking at the arrogant guy on the boat, Kenichi Amemiya smiled. He felt lucky. Kado? Amemiya Kenichi called out to the slightly younger man, who instinctively turned his head. He then saw a pair of red eyes with 3 Magatama spinning within them. Using the Sharingan to control an ordinary person wasn't particularly complex. Almost the instant he saw Kado, he was caught in the Sharingan's illusion, and was controlled by Amemiya Kenichi. However, Kado was clearly not unprepared. 4 ninjas suddenly leaped out from his side. Water style. Waterfall Jutsu. A torrent of water rushed towards Amemiya Kenichi. Really? So why do you have to shout out the name of a jutsu when you cast it? Are you OCD? Amemiya Kenichi couldn't understand why he had to shout it out when he could just cast it directly. He wondered if shouting it out made the jutsu more powerful. Kado, ninjas who shout out their jutsu are usually third-rate ninjas. Real ninjas don't use words when they cast their jutsu. Amemiya Kenichi had asked his teacher back then, and that was his response. Then Amemiya Kenichi remembered that his teacher seemed to have shouted out the name in the anime. Well, a third-rate ninja confirmed. Of course, Amemiya Kenichi knew this was just a show, to let the audience know what jutsu was being unleashed. He'd anticipated the presence of ninja guards around Kado, though. He formed hand seals, and slammed his hands down onto the ground. A wall of earth rose, blocking the surging water. Murder. All the porters around the docks fled, a relief that came to Amemiya Kenichi's mind. Otherwise, if these people hadn't left to watch the excitement, the lab would have had a few more supplies. Taking advantage of the moment of obstruction, Amemiya Kenichi released his body senses. The next second, the same lightning-like patterns appeared around his eyes. It's a thunderstorm today. Amemiya Kenichi looked at the dark clouds overhead. He'd seen the lightning just now, and now, with the help of his 3 Magatama Sharingan, he could see more closely. But then the air around them began to fog up, growing thicker and thicker, until it was impossible to see anything. Mist concealment jutsu? Amemiya Kenichi almost laughed out loud. Here's a little known fact. Fog is conductive. Of course, pure water vapor doesn't conduct electricity, but the fog here is mixed with a lot of impurities, so it is conductive. Descent. Thunder Dragon. Chapter 56 Koman. Boom. A deafening roar of thunder echoed from the sky, and some of Amemiya Kenichi's hair began to rise, a sign of grave danger. Thunder clouds in the sky carry a powerful electric field, and tiny charges on the body's surface interact with this field, causing the hair and fur to stand on end. Generally speaking, this phenomenon indicates a strong electric field overhead, potentially leading to a thunderstorm. What's that? A ninja from the hidden mist village looked up in horror. They had just sensed something was amiss. Looking up, they could see the head of a gigantic monster poking out from the sky through the mist. Is this a natural disaster? The villagers in the distance gazed in horror at the sea. Above it lay dark clouds, and within them, a massive head emerged. It had horns, tentacles, and even scales on its body, resembling fish scales. It was a strange looking creature, drenched in a dark red, exuding an aura of despair. If someone from another ninja village were to identify this monster, they might be able to discern its identity. However, for the common people of the Land of Waves, this monster was a completely unknown and terrifying presence. Kenichi Amemiya's expression was somewhat grim. Amen. No, I believe in science, so that should be science. I've screwed up. Kenichi Amemiya gritted his teeth. He hadn't expected his experiment to actually succeed. He had just entered Sage mode and immediately mobilized his Senjutsu chakra, combining it with his Sharingan to perform a Senjutsu of lightning release. This move was a personal creation inspired by Sasuke's lightning release Kirin, which he had used to experiment with. The good news was that it worked perfectly, but the bad news was that Kenichi found the move's power to be absurdly powerful. After all, lightning is a very untamable natural energy, and coupled with the massive amount of Senjutsu chakra he had mobilized to test its power, he had created a monster, a terrifying one. The thunder dragon in the sky, though comprised of only a head and a small portion of its body, was already feeling the strain of control. It was constantly draining his Senjutsu chakra. If he didn't break free, it would be a disaster. No. If it strikes down now, I'm already within its attack range. He frowned and shook his head. The fog was so thick that even those outside the primary attack range would be affected. We have to throw it far away, he said, struggling to control the thunder dragon in the sky. He aimed and flung it at a specific location. The thunder dragon instantly vanished from his sight. With his Sharingan, he could only make out a blurry trace before it vanished from view. He breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed best not to attempt these dangerous ninjutsu without first testing it. If that thing had struck down, even his Reshiman summoning wouldn't have been enough to stop it. While he could create pure water through his Senjutsu chakra, the electrical resistance of pure water wouldn't have been enough to stop the terrifying thunder dragon. Wait, where did I just lose it? Or thought crossed Amemiya Kenichi's mind, but before he could even think, he noticed that the water country ninjas who had attacked him earlier seemed to have fled. Though shielded by the mist hidden jutsu, they weren't fools. Such a terrifying ninjutsu wouldn't have stood a chance against them. Furthermore, they were merely hired ninjas. Even if their mission failed, they would at most be punished. Their lives were of no concern. So, they fled quickly. Amemiya Kenichi ignored them. After using wind release ninjutsu to disperse the mist, he found Kado beneath a nearby boat. You're quite the genius. Amemiya Kenichi looked at Kado with a strange expression. Kado had deliberately chosen someone else's boat instead of his own. He'd even gone so far as to conceal himself underwater, only occasionally poking his nose out for air. He was a ruthless individual. No wonder he could one day become the boss of such a large company. Hey, Ninja-sama, what can I do for you? Kado smiled humbly. No more nonsense, money, or life, Amemiya Kenichi demanded simply. If he hadn't come to Kado to extort money, he wouldn't have come. Kado was sensible. He didn't complain or play the victim. Instead, he took Amemiya Kenichi to his cargo ship and took out all the money. You're quite rich, man. Amemiya Kenichi raised an eyebrow. He hadn't counted yet, but it looked incredibly impressive, a dazzling sight. Ninja-sama, this is all the money I've made on this trip. I'll give it to you. Kado rubbed his hands together, a sly smile on his face. Amemiya Kenichi glanced at him. Generally speaking, the wealthy in the ninja world are backed by a country or a village. Otherwise, wealth without sufficient self-protection means they become nothing more than mobile ATMs. And Kado's backer was most likely the hidden mist village of the Land of Water. Okay, then I'll spare your life. Amemiya Kenichi used his Sharingan to roughly estimate the amount, which was at least over 100 million taels, an astronomical figure. No wonder people in the future say Kado could become a famous tycoon. He's truly wealthy. Even now he has a considerable amount of savings. And Kenichi Amemiya really intended to let Kado go. After all, The wool comes from the sheep, and sustainable development is important. Don't you have to harvest leeks in batches? As for whether this would reveal his identity, what does a Konoha ninja with the Sharingan have to do with me? Kenichi Amemiya. However, to avoid any problems, Kenichi Amemiya still grabbed Kado's collar and stared into his eyes. The three Magatama spun in Kenichi Amemiya's eyes, and Kado's eyes became confused again. Kenichi Amemiya fabricated an alternative story for Kado. After arriving in the Land of Waves, he was robbed by a passing ninja wearing Konoha clothes. Of course, this was just a facade. If Kado returned to find a ninja to remove the illusion, he would have imagined the alternate reality. He was controlled by a passing ninja, thus recreating his previous memories. Of course, if the other party is still able to perceive the truth hidden under this illusion, it does not affect him. He was wearing a mask when he found Kado. Chapter 57 is art. I added art. Over 100 million ryo seems like a lot, and it is indeed quite a bit. The ninja world's economic issues have always been a mystery. There's no detailed systematic description, so most of the time, I've been left to analyze it on my own. However, upon arriving in this world, Kenichi Amemiya discovered that the ninja world's economy was truly bizarre. A typical S-rank mission required at least 1 million ryo. Of course, many ninjas didn't seem to be doing well, and the main reason for this was the cost of replenishing ninja tools and learning ninjutsu. Kenichi Amemiya had even heard from his teacher that the village actually deducted a fee from each mission, which went into the village's treasury to fund more projects. His teacher had already completed over 100 S-rank missions, saving him a considerable amount of money. Kenichi Amemiya now had received so much money from Kado, which saved him a lot of time. But where's that thunder dragon I lost earlier? I hope it won't cause any trouble. Kenichi Amemiya scratched his head, unsure. Normal lightning strikes in nature can't strike very far, perhaps only 3 to 5 kilometers. However, some unique lightning strikes can stretch for over 700 kilometers, an incredible feat that even makes one doubt its authenticity. Thinking of this, Amemiya Kenichi grew a little unsure. It should be alright, right? Amemiya Kenichi wasn't quite so confident. The Land of Waves is located south of the Land of Fire, a small island nation surrounded by the ocean, but on the other side of the ocean, it also borders other countries. Scorpion of the Sand Village, what do you think of this proposal? Meanwhile, in a secluded valley in the Land of Wind, Konan folded her arms and looked at Scorpion. This was a ninja with great potential. Although she had been defeated in the previous test, she still had considerable potential and should be able to meet Nagato's requirements. Akatsuki? Scorpion looked at the woman before him, his face grimacing. He had just lost the battle, and even the human puppet of the third Kazakage, whom he had placed great hopes on, had been ineffective. He felt tormented by his own weakness. How could he avenge his parents in this state? Even though he had killed the Sandaime and the Konoha White Fang had committed suicide, he still couldn't find peace. After all, his enemies hadn't died at his own hands, so such revenge would be meaningless. Alright, I agree to join you. Scorpion hesitated for a moment, then finally nodded. He was quite interested in what the other party was saying. But just as Scorpion finished speaking, he heard a deafening roar. He instinctively looked up and saw a strange-looking monster suddenly flying towards him from a distance. No, it didn't seem like a monster, but more like the product of ninjutsu. The next second, the monster crashed into the front of the valley, instantly causing a loud thunderous roar. Red and black hair danced in the air, and Scorpion even found himself momentarily losing control of the puppet. What is this? Scorpion felt his hair stand on end, a little surprised. This must be a ninjutsu, but what kind of ninjutsu could achieve such an effect? Konan's expression was also serious. With such a commotion, anyone from the Sand Village who wasn't an idiot would definitely notice it. It seemed they needed to leave. Although the Akatsuki organization wasn't afraid of the Sand Village, it was still dormant. Only when the time was right would the entire ninja world learn to understand pain. Hurry, the ninjas from the Sand Village will definitely be here soon. Konan tossed a ring to Sasori and quickly left. As for Sasori, she wasn't worried. As a renegade ninja from the Sand Village, if Sasori couldn't escape, it would prove the enemy's strength was limited, and it wouldn't be a problem for him to not join the Akatsuki. Sasori didn't rush to leave. He glanced at the direction the monster had just flown from the sea. Then he returned to the site of the attack. A large pit had appeared there. The pit wasn't sand, but crystal glass. Though still stained with impurities, one could imagine what had happened there in that instant. The surrounding sand had also become somewhat vitrified, like streaks of lightning, spreading across the desert, some stretching over 100 meters. The sunlight shone brightly. How beautiful! Sasori exclaimed, looking at the vast glass pit before him. He was curious about how such a powerful ninjutsu was formed. It must be said, artists' ideas are always a bit strange. When Kenichi Amemiya returned with the money he'd earned from Kado, he discovered that Orochimaru was gone. The lab was quiet, and even the consumables had vanished. What did the teacher do? Kenichi Amemiya scratched his head, but he didn't pay much attention. His teacher was always mysterious. Kenichi Amemiya knew that the teacher had many labs, but he only visited those he had been to. As for those he hadn't been to, he didn't ask too many questions. To survive safely under the teacher's tutelage, one had to learn to limit unnecessary curiosity. But I'm curious, Kenichi Amemiya said, looking at the things outside the lab door with a hint of excitement. Just as he was about to go inside his own lab, he noticed a box hanging on the door. Upon opening it, he found a tube of frozen blood with the words Kaguya labeled on it. Of course, this wording does not mean that this tube of blood belongs to Kaguya Otsutsuki, but to the corpse bone vein. It seems that the teacher still remembers it. Amemiya Kenichi scratched his head. When he was in Konoha before, Amemiya Kenichi said that he wanted to study the corpse bone vein, and the teacher agreed. Although there was no follow-up after that, I didn't expect that. Even after leaving the village, the teacher still remembered it. But this thing, Amemiya Kenichi scratched his head. He had no plans to study the corpse bone vein for the time being, so he could only put it aside for the time being. Fortunately, there is a special storage cabinet in the laboratory, so there is no need to worry about it becoming ineffective. Of course, the time cannot be too long. Then while the teacher is away, let's prepare the thermobaric explosives first. Amemiya Kenichi stretched. It was still comfortable to stay in the laboratory, and there was a feeling of being back home. Then Amemiya Kenichi blew up his house. Chapter 58 3 minutes of silence for the laboratory. Looking at the laboratory belching thick smoke. No, that's not right. It should be the remains of a laboratory. Kenichi Amemiya felt a mixture of emotions. He hadn't expected things to turn out this way. After all, everything was fine before, and then, in the blink of an eye, the laboratory was gone. Is it because the addition of lightning attribute chakra energy affected the stability of the thermobaric explosive? Kenichi Amemiya sighed. Such a large laboratory, now gone. Kenichi Amemiya had previously mixed some stabilized explosives himself, and after testing, it had worked well. Then, Kenichi Amemiya had a bold idea to integrate chakra and see if they could combine. If so, perhaps they could create something even more powerful than a thermobaric bomb. Furthermore, explosives are generally quite stable, not the kind that would explode at the slightest touch or drop, as one might imagine. This was why Kenichi Amemiya decided to give it a try. He even deliberately reduced the amount of thermobaric explosives to prevent any problems. Kenichi Amemiya happened to have some research into lightning techniques, so he tried to incorporate lightning attribute chakra into the explosive. As a result, the thermobaric explosive, which had been relatively stable, suddenly underwent a violent reaction. If it weren't for Kenichi Amemiya's quick reaction, he would have been blown up. Even so, the laboratory was gone. Furthermore, the billowing smoke would undoubtedly attract Konoha's ninja, creating even more trouble. So Kenichi Amemiya had no choice but to abandon the laboratory and move elsewhere. I don't know if the money I've earned will be enough to cover the damage. Kenichi Amemiya sighed, gazing at the gaping hole. His teacher's laboratory certainly had no insurance, and there seemed to be no insurance company in the ninja world. He hoped his teacher wouldn't let him lose money. However, this experiment made Kenichi quite happy. After all, his idea was correct. Chakra could indeed be incorporated into a thermobaric bomb. Kenichi Amemiya thought he might try infusing fire attribute chakra next time. The thermobaric explosive, infused with lightning chakra, seems to have undergone some strange changes, increasing its power significantly, and even reacting with electricity. Next time, I need to find some consumables to test it to see its effect on the human body. However, the lab is definitely doomed. The ground has collapsed, and the contents inside are likely lost. Fortunately, the teacher took some materials with him when he left, otherwise the damage would have been even more staggering. Amemiya Kenichi touched the sealing scroll hanging from his waist. It contained some items he had just urgently collected, including the blood of the Hyuga clan, but it needed to be disposed of quickly. After all, these items, if exposed to room temperature, would quickly lead to contamination. Temperature control in a laboratory is always crucial, especially for a biological laboratory. For example, bacterial culture and DNA extraction in the lab require very specific temperatures. A 0.1 degree rise in temperature can kill bacteria instantly. Therefore, turning off the lab's freezer would be a serious disaster. Furthermore, if the blood can't be frozen, its quality will be affected. Fortunately, Amemiya Kenichi knew the locations of 2 other laboratories. He chose the one that was relatively close and quickly headed in that direction. Of course, before leaving, Amemiya Kenichi also used the dragon fire jutsu to set the laboratory on fire, heating it up and ensuring a thorough burn. Otherwise, leaking any information would be very troublesome. Something's not right in the land of fire lately, Amemiya Kenichi said, masked up, stealthily moving through the woods. He had just noticed some ninja running along the official road, but their number was small, and the leader seemed to be a single chunin, which was a bit unusual. Furthermore, the expressions of the ninja were extremely serious, and the leading chunin looked particularly worried. It seemed that something was amiss in Konoha. Amemiya Kenichi had seen such expressions before, and war would soon break out. Could it be war? Amemiya Kenichi stroked his chin. He felt that this was very likely. The greatest crisis facing Konoha was not the civil unrest within the village, but the threat of war. They might be from the hidden cloud village. Amemiya Kenichi ran quickly, but then he noticed someone in the woods ahead and quickly took cover. Moments later, 2 ninja emerged from the trees ahead. Amemiya Kenichi was stunned. Is the land of fire really that small? How did he run into Kakashi and Kei so soon? After not seeing Kakashi for so long, Kakashi was still the same. Even with the chatterbox Kei at his side, Kakashi's eyes remained deadpan. He exuded a keep-out aura, though it was clear that this aura had no effect on Kei. Kakashi, don't we have to go to the front lines? Those guys from the hidden cloud village are at war with us. Kei, now in his signature look, though still rather youthful, still bore a resemblance to the future Emperor Kei. This is a mission assigned by the Sandaime-sama, Kakashi said expressionlessly, his 3 Magatama Sharingan spinning beneath his mask. Since the death of the Yondaime, Kakashi's life has been fraught with turmoil. Danzo even considered having him join the route, but the third Hokage vetoed his plan. Even so, the defection of his friend Kenichi Amemiya dealt a heavy blow. Since the deaths of Obito and Rin, Kakashi had long since stopped allowing others into his life, let alone becoming friends. Kenichi Amemiya was the only friend he had during that time. Kakashi cherished this friendship, even suspecting his friend of the Ninetales rebellion the night before, but dismissed his suspicions, claiming he had fainted and was oblivious. Kenichi Amemiya, however, rubbed salt in Kakashi's wounds by pouring a bottle of alcohol. Kakashi, now deeply interested in tracking down Orochimaru and Kenichi Amemiya, was tasked with the search. The third Hokage, sensing Kakashi's intentions, tasked him with finding Orochimaru and his companions. Of course, as the situation became more urgent, Kakashi also knew that he would most likely be transferred to the front line to fight against the hidden cloud village. Chapter 59, Ratio Problem. It's the Kumogakure village's fault. After all, is another war coming? But it shouldn't be a big one, right? Kenichi Amemiya sighed as he watched Kakashi and Kei retreat. Konoha's third war had just ended, and now the Kumogakure village had taken advantage of the situation. However, it probably didn't escalate into the Ninja World War, otherwise it wouldn't have happened until the fourth. Kumogakure village? Kenichi Amemiya rubbed his chin. Wartime wasn't a friendly time for many, but for Kenichi Amemiya and Orochimaru, it was a golden opportunity. A perfect opportunity to acquire supplies. Moreover, compared to the familiar supplies from Konoha, Kenichi Amemiya felt that the muscular men of the Kumogakure village were more suited to his needs. He wanted to learn about the Kumogakure village's training methods. In theory, using electricity to stimulate the body's cells is feasible, and it could even cause muscles to vibrate at high speeds, reaching extremely high speeds. Kenichi Amemiya glanced at his left and right hands. Of course, he wasn't planning to create a strange ninjutsu like lightning release 5 girls vibration jutsu. Of course, developing it shouldn't be that difficult if he wanted to, and if he had the idea, he could even study the effects of electricity. Ahem. Amemiya Kenichi shook his head. The ninja world wasn't the time to be studying everyday ninjutsu. He couldn't expect to use this technique to defeat his enemies. He simply remembered that when he was learning Chidori, when Amemiya Kenichi grasped the violent lightning in his hand felt so intense that it trembled constantly, so he had to use his other hand to stabilize it. Regularly stimulating one's muscles with electricity should have a training effect, but this technique only worked for those in the ninja world. After all, Amemiya Kenichi had discovered that ninjas in the ninja world seemed to be a different species from ordinary humans. After Kakashi left, Amemiya Kenichi quickly ran towards the laboratory. If he didn't go, the contents of the sealed scroll would become problematic, which would be a problem. Kakashi turned back once, but found no trace of anything. However, he still felt that something might be amiss. Is this lab still operational, teacher? Amemiya Kenichi surveyed his surroundings curiously. The lab was hidden in the mountains, nestled beneath a sheer cliff, but access required chakra walking. This prevented any chance of discovery by ordinary people. While no such incident had occurred so far, it was still best to be safe. If it did occur, it would be incredibly troublesome, so it was better to be discreet. Compared to the previously regularly maintained lab, this one was much more deserted, devoid of anyone, and its facilities were largely out of service. Fortunately, despite the ninja world's difficulties, power was readily available, so after activating a fuel-powered generator, the base was back up and running. It just feels so out of place. Amemiya Kenichi scratched his head, gazing at the generator. The longer he spent in this world, the more his technology seemed strange. After all, this world looked more like a medieval city, yet it had electricity and engines. Even a poor country like the Land of Waves had fishing boats equipped with engines. Electricity had become a fixture of everyday life, with utility poles visible on the streets. Naturally, the base couldn't connect to the outside power grid, so they relied on generators. However, once the power was restored, Kenichi Amemiya hurriedly retrieved the contents of his sealed scroll and placed them in specialized laboratory equipment, avoiding any potential problems. Even so, he discovered that some of the bacteria in the petri dishes had died. Damn, aren't you quite so arrogant inside the human body? He couldn't help but grumble. They were battling chakra, their immune system, and constantly challenged by drugs and antibiotics, and yet, they died in a matter of seconds. Looking at the dead bacteria, Kenichi Amemiya suddenly had a brilliant idea. Could he try to imbue them with chakra? What would happen then? If bacteria mastered chakra and could refine it themselves, what would happen to the ninja world? A ninja version of a bacterial revolution? A crisis of the living dead? A zombie-like Naruto universe seemed possible. However, he had a research project on his hands, so this idea could only be temporarily recorded in his inspiration notebook. But I can't conduct research in the lab anymore. Otherwise, the teacher might kill me. Amemiya Kenichi carefully took out the raw materials for the thermobaric explosive. He planned to conduct more experiments. However, this time, he would not add any chakra. He planned to first adjust the ratio of the raw materials to find the most powerful formula. Once he had a fixed thermobaric explosive, he would gradually adjust the chakra. Of course, these experiments could not be carried out in the lab. Amemiya Kenichi didn't have the money to waste, so he decisively chose to mix them in the lab, record each ratio, label them, and then detonate them to test their power. As for making a thermobaric bomb every time, Amemiya Kenichi was tempted, but considering the difficulty of finding the raw materials, he gave up the idea. It would not be too late to solve this problem after he determined the ratio of the thermobaric explosive. This step is a relatively tedious and delicate job. Sometimes, a difference of 1 gram of raw materials may lead to completely different results. For this reason, Kenichi Amemiya especially prepared a notebook to record the ratio of these materials, and by the way, see if there will be any unexpected surprises. Meanwhile, in the Land of Rain, Orochimaru personally experienced the power of the Rinnegan. The completely unreasonable Shinra Tensei made Orochimaru show an eager look. This is the power of the Sage's Eye. Orochimaru has definitely added this Akatsuki organization. Nagato looked at Orochimaru below, feeling a little irritated. What's wrong with these 2 masters and apprentices? Are they both stupid? This one even came up wanting to show off his abilities. Orochimaru, don't forget your mission. Nagato warned. Now Akatsuki organization is in great need of money. Chapter 60 Science always requires patience. The purpose of joining the Akatsuki? Of course it's to pursue the beauty of art. Nagato woke up from a deep sleep, pinching his brow wearily. It had been ages since he'd had a nightmare. But tonight, he'd unexpectedly had another strange dream. In it, he dreamed that Sasori, the man Conan had recruited, had joined Kenichi Amemiya's group, and the Akatsuki was in turmoil. Who? Those 2 guys. If they can't even handle this task, they're still looking for another opportunity. No, that shouldn't happen. Nagato shook his head. If Konoha's S&A rank rebels couldn't even raise funds, then Konoha had no claim to being the most powerful of the 5 ninja villages. But the thought of Kenichi Amemiya and Orochimaru filled Nagato's heart with mixed emotions. Sasori had joined the Akatsuki, and they definitely have to hold a small meeting. He hoped those 2 wouldn't cause any trouble, especially Kenichi Amemiya. Meanwhile, Kenichi Amemiya, whom Nagato missed so much, was standing in a clearing in the Land of Fire, writing something in his lab notebook. The explosion power of number 3 is slightly higher than before, but it's still not what I expected. However, this firework is quite pretty. Amemiya Kenichi shook his head, looking at the crumbling stone before him. He had previously mixed the thermobaric explosives in the lab and returned with his 8 test pieces. Of course, for record-keeping accuracy, he had used ninjutsu to create some earthen houses. While the explosions of number 1 and 2 were successful, the effects weren't particularly impressive. Number 3, however, produced a deep purple flame. The fundamental reason fireworks vary in color is due to the different element used in their production, resulting in different flame colors. Amemiya Kenichi thought he might be able to find new ways to create fireworks in the future, perhaps even open a fireworks factory. Forget it. Time is short, the task is heavy, so I'll just have to be quick. Amemiya Kenichi shook his head and continued testing the other 5 test pieces. As for being discovered, Kenichi Amemiya wasn't worried. After all, the Land of Fire was vast, with numerous valleys and forests. He had deliberately chosen a remote, deserted location. If someone had managed to evade his observation, they must be quite powerful, and there was also a chance it was Zetsu's doing. Kenichi Amemiya remembered that Zetsu seemed to possess a unique reconnaissance method, making it impossible for even a cage-level warrior to detect him in hiding. However, Kenichi Amemiya wasn't worried about this. He was just an ordinary ninja, not a threat. After testing all 8 test subjects, Kenichi Amemiya came up with a rough estimate. In terms of sheer explosive power, test subject number 7 performed the best. The house, constructed using Earth-style ninjutsu, was completely destroyed, leaving a large crater in the ground. This was despite the relatively small amount of thermobaric explosives used in the experiment. Test subject number 5 also had a unique characteristic. The smoke from its explosion was poisonous. However, Kenichi Amemiya didn't take it too seriously, considering the abundance of toxins in the ninja world. Furthermore, Kenichi Amemiya defined thermobaric bombs as weapons for battlefields and the destruction of enemy structures, effectively killing large groups of people with limited strength. They required extreme destructive power, the kinetic energy of the explosion, and the ability to deplete oxygen from the air. Toxins and the like were unsuitable for thermobaric bombs. Thermobaric bombs were also incredibly powerful in their previous lives, but the ninja world was plagued by unruly ninjas, so Kenichi Amemiya wasn't entirely sure how effective they would be against Jonin and those above them. But for genin and ordinary people, thermobaric bombs were even more troublesome than the tailed beast balls. Hiding underground was a surefire way to kill them. And how often did the tail beast balls successfully achieve their goals? Not often. Once a tail beast appeared, its sheer size meant that any action it attempted would be highly visible. If Nagato had this thing, why bother with the Lashiansei? He could have just let Deidara drop the bomb from high altitude and be done with it, Kenichi Amemiya said, looking at the experimental record book in his hand with a satisfied smile. No, facing an opponent of the rank of a ninja village, we need to test whether the thermobaric bombs are capable of breaking through the barrier. Amemiya Kenichi scratched his head. Ninja villages typically have defensive barriers. While Konoha's barrier often seems like a joke, it's indeed an essential defensive measure for Konoha village. Therefore, if thermobaric bombs are to be used in actual combat, their effectiveness against the barrier must be tested. However, one thing is certain, the greater the yield of a thermobaric bomb, the greater its power and destructive potential. I really want to try it. If I can incorporate chakra into it, wouldn't the power be even greater? Amemiya Kenichi rubbed his hands excitedly. After using ninjutsu to smooth over the damage he had previously inflicted, he quickly left. As for researching how to fuse thermobaric explosives with chakra, Amemiya Kenichi had a preliminary idea of his own. Of course, if he wanted to conduct experiments, he would have to go out alone. If he blew up another laboratory, he could imagine the teacher's wrath. When Kenichi Amemiya returned to the experimental base, he felt a bit nervous. He couldn't help but glance around the lab, only to breathe a sigh of relief when he saw the teacher was gone. What's with all of a sudden this feeling of being afraid of my parents finding out about something I've done wrong? Kenichi Amemiya sighed in relief at the deserted base. Since the teacher wasn't there, he'd start working on some theoretical problems. Kenichi Amemiya actually quite enjoyed this kind of solitary life. Scientific experiments were often quite tedious, and a single result could require years, even decades, of research by multiple people. Fortunately, Kenichi Amemiya had a cheat code, otherwise he'd probably have been working on a thermobaric bomb until the Fourth Shinobi World War began. The fusion of chakra and thermobaric explosives can be roughly divided into two types. Kenichi Amemiya wrote down his thoughts. Perhaps we could seal the chakra separately from the explosives, then combine them after the fuse is detonated to produce a violent reaction. That's a promising idea. Kenichi Amemiya bit his pen, not noticing the presence of someone behind him. I felt a little dizzy this morning, like I was about to catch a cold. After taking some medicine, I told my dad to call me later. When I woke up, he thoughtfully tucked me in and took off my shoes. I slept soundly. Chapter 61 Cognitive Biases and Privileges. Doing an experiment? A familiar voice startled Kenichi Amemiya, and with a flash of his body, he dodged forward, crashing into the table. Turning back, he saw the experimental base, previously deserted, now occupied by someone, his teacher, Orochimaru. However, the teacher was folding his arms, looking at him with a strange expression, which made Kenichi panic. After all, he knew why the teacher had suddenly arrived. He must have discovered that the previous laboratory was gone. Teacher, there was a problem in the previous lab. I blew it up while I was doing an experiment. Kenichi Amemiya confessed honestly. He had no choice but to confess. The teacher had plenty of ways to investigate. A lie requires countless lies to cover it up, and Kenichi Amemiya felt it was better to be honest, otherwise things might go in a different direction. Okay, I understand. Orochimaru looked calm, not angry, which relieved Kenichi Amemiya. There's nothing valuable in that lab. What did you just write? I saw explosives? Orochimaru looked at his disciple with interest. He knew his student possessed unique insights into science, so upon returning home and seeing him writing, he leaned over to take a look, only to find himself completely baffled. It wasn't about explosives, of course, but rather his student's strange thinking. Yes, sir, that's something I researched myself, and I'm currently testing it, Amemiya Kenichi said honestly. His teacher must have studied in Gotham City, otherwise, why would he be so prone to appearing silently behind others? It might also have something to do with Amemiya Kenichi being so focused on his research that he wasn't paying attention. Next time, I need to be more careful, or else someone might stab me from behind. That would be hilarious. Amemiya Kenichi thought of Uchiha Madara, who was killed by Black Zetsu's Black Tiger Heart Rip technique. Tell me about it, Orochimaru said non-committally. He'd been tempted to lose his temper when he returned and discovered his lab was gone, but after furiously seeking out his student, Orochimaru's curiosity suppressed his rage. So Orochimaru decided to wait and see what his disciple's unusual ideas would be, and then decide whether to lose his temper. As for gunpowder, Orochimaru knew about it. After all, some mining companies used explosives for things like blasting mountains. However, it was extremely dangerous, so most ninjas wouldn't carry it on their person. Furthermore, the power of explosives was modest, easily surpassed by a high-level ninjutsu. So Orochimaru didn't know why his disciple was researching it. Seeing this, Amemiya Kenichi could only give a brief explanation. Thermobaric bombs had never appeared in this world, so he didn't know how to explain it. He could only say that he had seen others use them on a previous mission and wanted to study whether they could increase their power and apply it elsewhere. That's a good idea. The boss of the Konoha mining company did similar research before. Orochimaru wasn't very interested. Researching explosives was better than studying ninjutsu. Fire-style ninjutsu could exert even greater power than explosives. However, since his disciple was so interested, Orochimaru didn't want to dampen his enthusiasm, so he simply shared his knowledge, hoping to help his disciple avoid unnecessary setbacks. Amemiya Kenichi also listened attentively. After all, if there were any previous records of these experiments, that would be the best option. Previous papers and experimental records could save future generations a great deal of time. While explosives are relatively stable, they react after chakra fusion, rendering them completely ineffective. Only fire-attributed ones are possible, Orochimaru explained in great detail. Amemiya Kenichi couldn't help but glance at his teacher. Could it be that his teacher had researched this very thing? Otherwise, how could he know so much about it? However, Amemiya Kenichi noticed a discrepancy between what his teacher said and his current situation. According to his teacher, chakra fusion would cause immediate ineffectiveness, but in Amemiya Kenichi's case, a violent reaction occurred. What could explain this discrepancy? Could it be that the thermobaric explosive he was using had different properties, leading to this problem? Amemiya Kenichi felt it was very likely. The Naruto world clearly doesn't place much emphasis on this area of research. In the future, it's only Deidara's special abilities that will allow the ninja world to witness the art of explosions. But honestly, Deidara's explosions aren't replicable, and other ninjas are largely unable to replicate them. Their power and yield are also relatively weak compared to the weapons of previous lives. The only thing that can be said for the explosive clay is its operability and portability. By the way, now that you're back, how's the fundraising going? Orochimaru thought about business, and Amemiya Kenichi took out all the money he'd received from Kado. He had no intention of hiding anything. After all, he'd blown up a laboratory before, and it was a good thing his teacher hadn't let him lose money. In his previous life, this would have cost him his entire life savings. Over 120 million. Okay. It's a little for two people, but I also picked up some from a wealthy businessman on the way back. Orochimaru nodded and tossed out a scroll. There was also money inside, more than 50 million taels, which was quite a lot when added up. At least it would be enough to complete the Akatsuki organization's mission. Amemiya Kenichi was also very calm when he saw this. He knew before that sometimes some ninja villages would actually let ninjas rob rich people in other countries. As long as it was not too excessive, all ninja villages would tacitly accept this rule. After all, if they robbed those rich people would seek the help and protection of the ninjas. At that time, their own ninja villages could also make money, and part of the robbed money could be confiscated. It felt like a pirate licensed by the British royal family. Looking at the teacher putting the money into a sealed scroll, Amemiya Kenichi had a bold idea. Although he knew it was very dangerous, he still couldn't help but want to try it. This was to verify the scientific theory. So he stretched out his hand and stretched it towards the teacher's head. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62. I have contributed to the organization. In the ninja world, the soul is real, that's undeniable. But is it the soul or the brain that influences a person's memory? This is a question worth exploring. And now, Kenichi Amemiya wants to try to study this. He wants to see if the habits he'd instilled in Yuki during their previous training will still be effective after his teacher's reincarnation. This is a serious scientific question. But before Kenichi Amemiya could reach out, the teacher turned and looked at him. "What are you doing?" Orochimaru looked at his disciple in surprise. He was a member of the Sannin, so he had to be wary even of his own student. This had nothing to do with trust, it was simply ninja instinct. "Teacher, I see a white hair on your head," Kenichi Amemiya said naturally. In fact, he did see it with his Sharingan. It was a fallback he had created, and now it came in handy. It was a bit of a shame. He had originally wanted to test Pavlov's dog theory in the ninja world, and also to study the influence of the soul on the body's memory, but his teacher had turned back. It was probably over. White hair? Orochimaru was stunned. His body was very young, so it shouldn't have white hair. Could it be the effect of the reincarnation technique? At this thought, Orochimaru's expression grew serious. "Pull it out for me." Orochimaru intended to investigate the cause of this white hair, to see if it was a sudden onset of graying, or due to some other reason. Orochimaru was always extremely cautious regarding matters related to his immortality plan. If any problems arose, the best approach was to quickly identify and resolve them. He had developed the reincarnation technique, and it was still in its first testing phase, so naturally there might be some issues. He could just refine it over time. Amemiya Ken was stunned for a moment, then a surge of joy filled his heart. He had just been thinking he might not be able to complete his test, but unexpectedly, this opportunity presented itself. With swift movement, he reached out, and, before his teacher could regret it, plucked the hair from his head. Naturally, he touched his teacher's head. Well, it felt like touching his head, nothing special, but there was warmth, suggesting a living body. That made sense, considering his teacher could still refine chakra and eat, so he couldn't be dead. Kenichi Amemiya carefully observed his teacher, eager to see if he had any reaction. Orochimaru, on the other hand, seemed perfectly normal, showing no reaction at all. Kenichi Amemiya was a little disappointed. It seemed that after so long without reinforcing this stimulation, Yuki might have become overwhelmed by it. "Teacher, your white hair." Kenichi Amemiya handed the hair to Orochimaru, who took it and left to study it. Watching his teacher leave, Kenichi Amemiya scratched his head. Just before leaving, his teacher had handed him the scroll, asking him to take it to the Land of Rain and hand it over to the Akatsuki. It looked like he had to go out again, but before he did, Amemiya Kenichi decided to take his raw materials with him and continue researching the thermobaric explosive mix as he hurried along. He was a little anxious, but there was no other way. War between the Hidden Cloud Village and Konoha was likely, and many ninja would be on the battlefield. He wanted to test the effectiveness of the thermobaric bomb. What better place to test it than a battlefield? He thought there was none. So, time was running out, and the task was heavy. After Amemiya Kenichi left, Orochimaru gazed at the white hair in his hand, lost in thought. Just now, when his disciple had been plucking his hair, he'd felt an inexplicable tingling sensation throughout his body, which puzzled him. Orochimaru was certain he didn't have any such medical condition. Perhaps it was just a natural reaction to the hair follicles being pulled out of his body. Orochimaru didn't dwell on it, but was more concerned with why his new body had such a problem. White hair wasn't supposed to appear on a ninja of his age. I don't know if Akatsuki has recruited any other ninjas, but Kakuzu must be recruited. Without Kakuzu, Akatsuki's development will lag behind. Amemiya Kenichi sighed. He was on his way, having rested last night before hastily waking up, to rush to the Land of Rain. Few people are as dedicated to the organization as he is. He's practically the Akatsuki version of Jin. The good news is that Jin hasn't been surrounded by undercover agents yet. The only known undercover, Uchiha Itachi, probably hasn't even started squatting on telephone poles yet. And having Kakuzu is a good thing. Akatsuki can't do without Kakuzu, just like the West can't lose Jerusalem. Amemiya Kenichi pondered this as he scurried into the Land of Rain. The number of ninjas at the border between the Land of Fire and the Land of Rain has decreased, but patrols have increased. Amemiya Kenichi understood the reason. Konoha didn't want to have to watch its back while busy dealing with the hidden Cloud Village. However, the Land of Rain probably wouldn't have the guts to challenge Konoha, and the war probably wouldn't escalate this time, which was a good thing. Life is truly hard for the people of the Land of Rain. Looking at the civilians busy working the farm to earn a living, Kenichi Amemiya couldn't help but sigh. After Hanzo's downfall, life in the Land of Rain remained the same, showing no signs of improvement despite the Akatsuki's presence. However, in this era, being able to live a stable life without the threat of war was perhaps a blessing for these people. It's better to be a dog in prosperous times than a human in troubled times, as the saying goes. While traveling, Kenichi Amemiya spotted someone selling food on the street. It was a woman of uncertain age, with a few wrinkles on her face, but not many. What she was selling was quite interesting, round black cakes. "Hello, what is this?" Kenichi Amemiya couldn't help but ask. He hadn't eaten lunch yet, and while he could have had some higan, a type of shakugan, they didn't taste very good. "This is at B," a calm voice said. It was Conan. Kenichi Amemiya turned his head and saw Conan and a ninja beside her. Chapter 63. Strength depends on the version. Being handsome is a lifelong thing. There was another ninja beside Conan, but it wasn't Nagato. He wasn't wearing a Katsuki uniform, but rather ordinary casual clothes, and he seemed to be carrying something on his back. Wait, why does this guy look familiar? Earthcake? Although curious about the identity of the ninja beside Conan, Kenichi Amemiya still looked at Conan. Ignoring someone when they are talking to you is considered rude. Kenichi Amemiya considered himself a gentle and polite person. "Well, it's a specialty food from our own country, made from a certain kind of earth. It's not nutritious, but it fills your stomach." Conan spoke calmly, as if nothing had to do with her. However, Kenichi Amemiya could see the lingering sadness in Conan's eyes. Conan was a good child. She didn't smoke, drink, or perm her hair. Although she was an Akatsuki member and a wealthy woman who played with explosive talismans, Conan was indeed a good child. Kenichi Amemiya scratched his head. Earthcake? He knew what he meant. After all, this kind of thing had happened in his past life. Guanine soil was a similar thing. People often say they are so poor they have to eat dirt, but little do they know that in the past, people truly could only eat dirt. This isn't an exaggeration, it's an adjective. Kenichi Amemiya bought a dirt cake, but he didn't intend to eat it. He simply had his own ideas. After inheriting his friend Yahiko's legacy, Nagato established the Akatsuki as the ruler of the Rain Country. Indeed, the Rain Country experienced no major changes in the future of the ninja world, such as being plunged into war. It wasn't until Akatsuki's exposure that it attracted the attention of other ninja villages. Kenichi Amemiya didn't know what Nagato thought of the lower classes of the Rain Country, but he decided to test them to see if he cared about their lives. If he did, he could use this as a pretext to persuade Nagato to set up a research department for him, allowing him to focus on his research. Kenichi Amemiya didn't enjoy engaging in life or death battles. He preferred to develop novel gadgets and let his enemies close their eyes in bliss under the weight of their power and firepower. To Amemiya Kenichi's surprise, Conan actually bought all the dirt cakes and glanced at him. Only one. Although Conan didn't say so, Amemiya Kenichi had a feeling that was what she meant, and he felt a momentary unease. Conan was still quite adorable, after all. Is this the new member? Amemiya Kenichi noticed the ring on the hand of the person next to Conan. He also had one, but his ring was made of jade, and the other person's ring was made of something else. Speaking of jade, Amemiya Kenichi thought of something. He glanced at the ninja before him. The other person's face. Scorpion. Amemiya Kenichi was a little surprised. He recognized the ninja's identity, Scorpion of the Red Sand, a genius puppeteer from the Sand village, capable of even killing the third Kazakage. He was a formidable ninja. Furthermore, he was a formidable figure, having transformed himself into a puppet, achieving another level of eternity. However, the other person now looked more like a person than a puppet, so Kenichi Amemiya hadn't recognized him at first glance, but only now did he. This is a new member to the organization. Ayo, Konan briefly introduced. She had brought Sasori here so that Nagato could assign him a mission and to prepare some clothes for him. Kenichi Amemiya's mouth twitched. Ayo, wasn't that Sasori? But the other person's eyes were like a dead fish, as if he had no interest in anything in the world. So you're the new member? I'm Kenichi Amemiya. Kenichi Amemiya smiled and extended his hand. Sasori glanced at him when he heard his name. Konohase rank renegade ninja. Sasori examined Kenichi Amemiya. He was surprised to hear him speak his real name. After all, the woman next to him had said that everyone in the organization communicated by code names. Noticing Sasori's gaze, Konan's expression grew a little awkward. Nagato had indeed asked everyone to address each other by their titles, but it was clear that this didn't work for Kenichi Amemiya, a troublemaker. Here are your clothes. Konan couldn't help but grumble. If he kept talking like that, the new members would start to doubt the organization's integrity before they even arrived. They were the Akatsuki, not some comedic comedy troupe. Okay. Amemiya Kenichi had originally planned to chat with Sasori. He was intrigued by Sasori's puppetry technology. If it were a little more complex, using a few more materials, could it be made into a Gundam? Then, he could study the Manjaki, likely a game of Manjaki Sharingan, and successfully upgrade to the Manjaki Sharingan, then directly attach Susanoo to the Gundam. Wouldn't that be even better? Of course, it would still be challenging, but he wasn't in a rush. He'd just take it slow. He couldn't help but glance over at Konan's words. Clothes were important, but he wasn't sure if they looked cool. But looking at the clothes, Amemiya Kenichi was a little disappointed. They looked like perfectly ordinary uniforms, the only difference being that they were a little looser, so if the buttons were unbuttoned, they could become a cape. That's not artistic at all. Amemiya Kenichi sighed, and Sasori couldn't help but glance at him. Same kind? Sasori was eager to try. He also loved art. Eternal things were the most beautiful things in the world. The thought of growing old and becoming someone else made him feel unsatisfied with his body. I made this, Konan said, her eyes half closed as she stared at Kenichi Amemiya, a look of displeasure on her face. She'd had to modify Kenichi Amemiya's clothes just to suit this guy's every request. She'd never seen a ninja so bothered. Aren't clothes just something you wear casually? As long as they work, it's fine. But it's really not good looking. Kenichi Amemiya scratched his head. He had to admit, the ninja world's aesthetics were truly unique, but that also had something to do with the people's daily battles. In the ninja world, anyone in their 40s or 50s was considered old. Living to Sarutobi Hiruzen's age was rare, especially for civilians. Sasori silently gave a thumbs up. What a brave warrior, he said. Although Sasori was a very independent person, he knew that polite words would help lighten the mood in such situations. Unexpectedly, Kenichi Amemiya spoke so bluntly. How brave. Konan's face darkened. Chapter 64. Because I've been caught in the rain, I want to hold an umbrella for others. Scorpion, are you a puppeteer? Amemiya Kenichi looked at Sasori with interest. They were on their way to the rain village, and with nothing else to do, Amemiya Kenichi decided to chat with Sasori. It was a way to strengthen their relationship, and with a foundation of affection, communication became easier. Yeah, Sasori nodded. He didn't say much, remaining silent most of the time, but thankfully, he would answer questions. Amemiya Kenichi rubbed his chin. He remembered that Sasori now seemed to pursue eternal beauty, a stark contrast to the future Deidara. Speaking of puppets, don't you think they're a near permanent work of art? As long as they're perfected, they can exist forever without breaking. Amemiya Kenichi noticed that Sasori's eyes had brightened. This brought a smile to Amemiya Kenichi's face. As expected, if you knew a little about a character's personality beforehand, it was easy to cater to their preferences. Even on the short drive to the rain village, Amemiya Kenichi and Sasori were already communicating normally. Konan watched from the sidelines, making no attempt to intervene, though she was quite impressed by Kenichi Amemiya's interpersonal skills. Konan wasn't particularly adept at building closeness, and she and Sasori barely communicated. Tama, have you completed your mission? Seeing the Omega Cure village approaching, Konan couldn't help but ask. Nagato often manipulated pain into carrying out missions to increase funding for the organization. So, after Orochimaru and Kenichi Amemiya joined, Nagato's first task was to raise funds. Now that Sasori had joined, he was likely going to do the same. It's done. We've only raised about 180 million ryo this time, Kenichi Amemiya said, smiling at Konan. That puts him and his teacher at around 90 million ryo each, which wasn't a small amount. However, this was ultimately a tricky tactic, and using it too much would likely draw attention from the various ninja villages, so caution was advised. Konan wasn't surprised, simply nodded, and then led Kenichi Amemiya and Sasori to the Omegakure village. It wasn't raining there at the moment. Led by Konan, Kenichi Amemiya and Sasori both encountered Nagato-controlled Tendo Pain. However, Kenichi Amemiya was particularly concerned by the two figures accompanying Tendo Pain. The figure with a carnivorous plant growing from its neck instantly identified them as Zetsu. The masked figure, with its exposed eyes, also confirmed it to be Obito. Are there new members? Zetsu, the hermaphrodite dressed in Akatsuki uniform, sized up Kenichi Amemiya and Sasori with a look of surprise. Kenichi Amemiya curled his lips inwardly. Zetsu was a real showman. This guy must have known about Sasori and I joining Akatsuki, and his identity was probably thoroughly investigated. Heh, Obito sneered, looking at Kenichi Amemiya. The three Magatama Sharingan in Kenichi's eyes caught his eye. These are you and King, who recently joined our Akatsuki organization. And Sora hasn't arrived yet, Nagato briefly introduced. He also introduced Zetsu and Obito to Kenichi Amemiya and Sasori. When introducing Obito, he simply said he was a member of the Akatsuki organization, but didn't have a ring yet. His specific identity wasn't revealed, but Kenichi Amemiya knew him. Oh, Senior Zuan, you're obviously a talent. Such a unique look, so handsome. Kenichi Amemiya enthusiastically extended his hand, then shook Zetsu's, shaking it enthusiastically. Zetsu looked at Kenichi Amemiya with a strange expression. He knew he was an A-rank rebel ninja from Konoha, but to be recognized and awarded a ring by Nagato meant he must be a talent too. He hadn't expected such enthusiasm, but seeing Nagato and Konan's accustomed expressions, he knew this was probably his personality. Although the senior is wearing a mask, his eyes are full of personality. Kenichi Amemiya extended his hand again, but Obito made no move to shake his hand. You're not a Uchiha. Obito narrowed his eyes, his Mangekyou Sharingan now closed. Kenichi Amemiya immediately gave him a thumbs up, smiling as he explained that he had been transplanted with the Uchiha clan's 3 Magatama Sharingan. Obito looked at Kenichi Amemiya deeply, but said nothing. He had only one obsession in mind. As for his former family, he didn't care. Kenichi Amemiya didn't show any embarrassment at being rejected. Instead, he smiled and withdrew his hand, along with the scraps of skin scraped from Zetsu's hand. Alien material acquired. Alright, you, I heard from Bay that you're here to surrender your and Sora's mission funds. Nagato looked at Kenichi Amemiya. He wanted to get this guy out of the Akatsuki base as soon as possible. Otherwise, if Kenichi Amemiya stayed there, Akatsuki would become a market. Kenichi Amemiya handed the sealing scroll to Nagato directly, and seeing the hint of satisfaction on Nagato's face, Kenichi Amemiya also smiled. What you eat now, you will have to vomit it all out sooner or later. As long as you still care about the lives of the underprivileged in your rain country, as long as you feel like holding an umbrella for someone after getting caught in the rain, then all the money will go back to you. It's hard to say whether Kakuzu will even have to work for himself. Okay, you can go now. Our current mission is still to collect funds. Nagato was about to send him away. Actually, I have something I want to discuss with you, Chief. Amemiya Kenichi rubbed his hands, a smile on his face. Nagato's mood became complicated. This guy was here again. And so respectful, which actually made Nagato feel a little strange. After all, Amemiya Kenichi had always seemed so carefree and indifferent. His rudeness at first, and his respectfulness later seemed to indicate something. Zetsu and Obito watched with interest, eager to see what this new member had to say. Only Sasori wondered when Amemiya Kenichi would be free, so they could discuss art together. Captain, I have a way to ensure that the people of Rain Country have enough to eat every day, Amemiya Kenichi said with a smile. The entire base fell silent. But Amemiya Kenichi was focused on Nagato. Nagato's opinion was what mattered most. So, Nagato, who once became a refugee, barely able to survive, and later founded the Akatsuki organization with his companions, what choice would you make? Regarding updates, after the release, we will release 10,000 words every day. We are still recommending it now, and too many words will affect the subsequent recommendations. Please vote for recommendations, monthly tickets, etc. Thank you very much for your donations and support for this book. Chapter 65. So what is the significance of establishing this rule? The Akatsuki organization aims to bring peace to the ninja world, though most of its members have their own agendas. But if anyone truly desires peace, it's naturally Nagato and Konan, the two heirs of Yahiko's legacy. Nagato stared at Kenichi Amemiya, speechless for a long time. He had lived in the Land of Rain for a long time, lost his best friend there, and witnessed the poverty its inhabitants lived in, even having once been one of them. However, after killing Hanzo, facing the civilians of the Land of Rain, Nagato realized there wasn't much he could do. Vigorously develop commerce? If the tiny Land of Rain flourished economically, it would be a culprit, drawing the attention of neighboring powers. Exposing Akatsuki's strength would also hinder the implementation of their ultimate plan. Therefore, Nagato remained silent, merely improving public security in the Land of Rain. At least, everyone could live in peace, which was already a rare achievement. What's your solution? Nagato asked Kenichi Amemiya, eager to hear what he had in mind. In reality, most people simply want to have enough to eat, but the people of the Land of Rain clearly don't. Amemiya Kenichi held out the mud cakes he bought earlier. Obito, Zetsu, and Sasori remained expressionless. While many people in this world struggled to eat, ninjas clearly weren't. Furthermore, even ninjas, who possessed extraordinary abilities countless times superior to those of ordinary humans, could sometimes become a burden. Amemiya Kenichi had previously read an analysis that argued that the wars in Naruto were designed to deplete these excess ninjas, thereby restoring productivity and balance between supply and demand. Nagato remained silent, simply staring at Amemiya Kenichi. He knew, of course, that people weren't getting enough to eat, but the food production was limited. Even turning the entire Land of Rain into farmland wouldn't work, especially since many areas were unsuitable for cultivation due to the excessive rainfall. So, my plan is to research crops that increase food production. If yields increase, everyone will have enough to eat. Amemiya Kenichi held out his large cake. Besides, this isn't entirely a pipe dream. In the past, the vast majority of China's people lived comfortably thanks to increased grain production. And this was all due to, you can do it? Nagato was skeptical. No one in this world had ever done anything like this. It was completely blank. It requires a long period of experimentation and cultivation. Amemiya Kenichi shrugged. Hybrid rice and the like weren't created overnight. They required a long period of cultivation and screening. And Amemiya Kenichi was confident in proposing this because of the existence of something as unpredictable as chakra in this world. While in the Land of Waves, Amemiya Kenichi had collected some plants and discovered that chakra had a unique effect on them. However, specific research would require considerable time. If they could identify a specific positive effect, perhaps a significant amount of time could be saved. TSK, Obito couldn't help but laugh. What's the point? What if they couldn't figure anything out? It would be better to bring the entire ninja world under his control and implement the infinite Tsukuyomi plan. If you have research results that support your point, we'll talk then. Nagato gave a positive response, which Amemiya Kenichi felt relieved. Hybrid rice research was essential. In his previous life, an acre of hybrid rice could yield a staggering 1,200 kilograms. Of course, that was the highest yield, with the average yield around 800 kilograms. But even a stable nation like the Land of Fire only yields around 400 kilograms per acre. Agricultural development in this world is still at a relatively low level, so the average yield of crops isn't very high. If his research succeeded, it would be a monumental revolution for the entire ninja world. Okay, but I want some time for my research. If I'm collecting funds every day, I won't have time for research, right? Amemiya Kenichi's words made Nagato's face darken. He was wondering if Amemiya Kenichi was just trying to slack off. But when he saw the mud cake Amemiya had tossed on the table and remembered how he'd once had to dig through garbage dumps for a little food, he nodded in agreement. Ayo, you'll follow me for now. Nagato was about to arrange future plans with the new member, Sasori. The Akatsuki organization was always divided into TWAS, so they could keep each other in check. It was just that they weren't strong enough before, so now they could divide up. Captain Pain, can I follow Kenichi Amemiya? Sasori couldn't help but ask. Nagato's face darkened. Here he goes again, another one calling each other by name within the organization. Didn't he remember saying everyone should call each other by code names? Forget it, break this rule. He was tired. Kenichi Amemiya was already giving him a headache, and now Sasori had him. Reason, Nagato didn't want to talk. Because I want to exchange puppetry techniques with you. It's very helpful to me. Sasori stated his reason directly. Alright. Kenichi Amemiya gave Nagato a strange look. Did he think he'd just heard Nagato sigh? Beside him, Obito's shoulders twitched. If it weren't for maintaining his old-fashioned persona, he would have laughed. It was rare to see Nagato so humiliated. After sending away the annoying Amemiya Kenichi and the others, Nagato finally breathed a sigh of relief. He found that he had become more and more tired since Amemiya Kenichi joined the Akatsuki organization. That guy was really annoying. Nagato, what do you think of what he said? Conan glanced at his friend and asked hesitantly. Compared to Nagato, Conan knew more about the environment that the people of the Rain Country were living in. Otherwise, there would not be such a thing as Earthquake. He and Orochimaru were kicked out because they did some illegal experiments. There should be a certain possibility. Nagato pinched his eyebrows. If it really succeeds, there will be fewer hungry people in the world. But by then, those arrogant big countries will surely increase taxes arrogantly, right? Therefore, the ninja world still needs a reform. I have a target I want to recruit, but I need to go there in person. Nagato was about to go out. The Akatsuki organization needed some members who were less troublesome. Kakuzu is not bad. I won't mention the name here, but everyone should know who he is. The Immortal National Scholar. Chapter 66 The Rich Woman's Black Silk Long Legs. Looks like we need to put the hybrid rice research project on the agenda. Amemiya Kenichi scratched his head. His previous conversation with Nagato hadn't been without results. At least Nagato had hinted at a glimmer of possibility, though he'd need to bring his own experimental results first. But it was similar in his previous life. First, they'd paint a rosy picture and then coax enough research funding. Investors won't show their hand until they see the rabbit. Relying on the Akatsuki was also something Amemiya Kenichi had planned from the beginning. Experiments were too expensive, so having an organization behind the scenes was the best option. The root's support for his teacher had made his experiments much easier, allowing him to develop his own laboratory, something Amemiya Kenichi planned to replicate. Besides, the Akatsuki organization had so many talented people and so much research material. Looking at the flakes of Zetsu skin in his hand, Amemiya Kenichi smiled. Amemiya, that AI you were talking about earlier, is it really possible? But then, hearing Scorpion's curious questioning, Amemiya Kenichi remembered he still had a friend by his side. It's artificial intelligence, Scorpion. If you don't mind, you can just call me Kenichi. Kenichi Amemiya patiently explained to the curious Scorpion beside him. Scorpion was a ninja pursuing eternity, and his ideas were quite unique, making him something of an unconventional scientist. Kenichi Amemiya felt that winning over Scorpion was a good idea. Furthermore, Scorpion's future potential was considerable, though he hadn't yet made himself a puppet. Okay, Kenichi, then how exactly should this artificial intelligence be realized? Scorpion readily accepted, or perhaps he was only concerned with one thing right now, the artificial intelligence Kenichi Amemiya had mentioned. Kenichi Amemiya scratched his head. He had previously asked Scorpion to find some common ground, so Kenichi Amemiya shared his ideas. In his previous life, when it came to puppets, robots were naturally the most powerful. While robots didn't have control strings, the concept was still worth considering. And when it came to robots, the inevitable topic turned to artificial intelligence, a topic that's been discussed extensively in science fiction circles. Films like Omnic Crisis and The Matrix all explore whether the development of computer technology poses a threat to humanity itself. However, in the current ninja world, this concept is definitely a very futuristic concept. This requires further research. First, we can use chakra to give the puppet an energy source, allowing it to operate based on chakra. However, after all, Amemiya Kenichi had a scientific foundation from his previous life. So, for now, a simple trick to fool Sasori could be done. Then design a set of behavioral logic, but this step is a bit complicated. Amemiya Kenichi and Sasori walked slowly along the road of Megacure Village, Sasori listening intently. This made Amemiya Kenichi feel strangely like a teacher teaching a student. The thought of artificial intelligence made Amemiya Kenichi's expression become complicated. After all, he had always been puzzled by the technological level of the ninja world. Computers existed in the ninja world. Amemiya Kenichi was certain of this, having seen such a thing before in Konoha. It was quite amazing. He just didn't understand why they didn't use the internet to connect the world and create something computer-based. Moreover, Kenichi Amemiya remembered that in the future, his teacher, Orochimaru, had developed something as outrageous as the mecha Naruto, capable of absorbing the Nine-Tails chakra to become a Jinchuriki. It was truly incredible. It seemed as though his teacher possessed core ninja technology. If that's the case, I think I could give it a try, although it's a bit complicated. Sasori seemed quite excited. But then again, for a puppeteer, the idea of a machine acting on their verbal commands, even independently performing tasks, was incredibly tempting. So, will you come with me? Kenichi Amemiya felt a mix of emotions. It would be nice for Sasori to follow him, but he wasn't sure what his teacher would think. And if he really took Sasori to his teacher's experimental base, he'd probably have some objections. Well, since I've joined the Akatsuki, I'm planning to set up my own base in the Land of Rain. Kenichi, are you coming? Sasori said excitedly. Kenichi Amemiya glanced at Sasori. Sasori was now quite talkative and had a very expressive expression. Perhaps the transformation of his body had affected his psychology as well. Building a base would cost a lot of money, wouldn't it? Amemiya Kenichi said, a touch envious. He did have some money, and it would be a good thing if he could use this opportunity to complete his previous assignment. Amemiya Kenichi still hadn't completed his optional assignment to build his own laboratory. Building it in the Land of Fire wasn't very safe, so the Land of Rain was a good choice. It was unlikely to be attacked by hostile ninjas until the Akatsuki was exposed, which attracted the attention of other ninja villages. It wasn't far from other major nations either, so it was quite convenient. I have plenty of money, Sasori said nonchalantly. It occurred to Amemiya Kenichi that Sasori seemed to have a puppet of the third Kazekage, and he was quite good at making money. But how did the third Kazekage die at Sasori's hands? Amemiya Kenichi couldn't quite recall. Best friend. Amemiya Kenichi patted Sasori on the shoulder. He had made this friend his life. Of course, Amemiya Kenichi wasn't planning on currying favor with a wealthy individual. If he really wanted to curry favor with someone, why wouldn't he choose Conan's beautiful black stockings? Conan was quite wealthy. Amemiya Kenichi even suspected she could mass produce detonating tags. Otherwise, how did she come up with 600 billion? Even if Kakuzu worked daily for Akatsuki, the figure of 600 billion was still a bit outrageous. Amemiya Kenichi declined Sasori's invitation for now. He planned to return to his teacher, to report on his day's events, and, while at the same time, to isolate Zetsu's genes in the lab. He intended to see what was so special about the Tatsuki clan. He also had to continue researching thermobaric bombs and hybrid rice. He didn't need to see results immediately. As soon as he had some results, he could go to Nagato. Overall, he had a lot on his plate, but the thermobaric bombs were top of the list. After all, the war between Kumogakure and Konoha was a major event, and it would be a shame if he didn't go and test the thermobaric bomb's power. Teacher, I'm back. Amemiya Kenichi pushed open the door to the lab and saw his teacher looking at him with one arm raised. Chapter 67 A man who is wealth in his own words. Oh, it's Kenichi. The teacher calmly waved to Amemiya Kenichi, appearing perfectly composed. Kenichi didn't scream or anything. This was perfectly normal. Seeing any limb in the experimental base wasn't unusual, but seeing the teacher cooking was quite terrifying. And after taking one look at the arm, Kenichi Amemiya had a rough idea of what was going on. Although they had defected from Konoha village, wasn't there still a powerful figure in Konoha village who needed their help? Teacher, is this an order from the Sannin-sama? Kenichi Amemiya casually placed Zetsu's skin scrapings in a test tube and soaked them. Before extracting the genes, they needed to soak them for a while to facilitate processing. Yes, the Sannin Hokage wants a better replacement arm. Orochimaru was checking the left hand's suitability and then injecting something. Kenichi Amemiya smacked his lips. Hadn't the Sannin Hokage already replaced a suitable arm? Why was he planning to do so now? There shouldn't be any irreversible rejection in such a short time. But the Sannin-sama is truly a hypocrite. While issuing a wanted notice for himself and the teacher, he still needs the teacher's help. And now he's here again. Teacher, how's the village going? I think we are going to go to war with the Hidden Cloud village again. Amemiya Kenichi couldn't help but ask. Konoha has been plagued by many disasters. Although the savior, Uzumaki Naruto, has been born, he's still just a baby, ignorant and incompetent. What can he do? Furthermore, with his own intrusion, the future of the ninja world remains uncertain, but these minor plot twists shouldn't have much of an impact. Later, we might see Hinata kidnapped, the Hidden Cloud village forcing them, and Hisashi Hyuga taking the blame. It's all good and peaceful, but things seem to have improved between Danzo and the Sannin. Orochimaru didn't care about the decaying Konoha. If it weren't for the cooperation with the village, he wouldn't bother. Is the Sannin-sama still smoking? How's his health report? Amemiya Kenichi walked over and took hold of the left hand. Orochimaru's expression brightened considerably at the mention of this topic, showing some progress. The Sannin-sama, you've been coughing a lot, but since he smokes a lot, it's not surprising, Orochimaru said slowly. Amemiya Kenichi nodded. It seemed both Sarutobi Hiruzen and his son Sarutobi Asuma were quite fond of smoking. It was a good thing the teacher left early, otherwise Asuma would have been targeted. That's a good thing. Tsunade-sama is not in Konoha anyway, so we won't find anything unusual for a while. Amemiya Kenichi smiled. If Tsunade were in the village, there might be more trouble. But Tsunade wasn't there. She had left the village and hadn't been heard from since, with no sign of returning to Konoha. How have you been since you joined the Akatsuki? Orochimaru shook his head. His arm wasn't working. There were still some issues. Would he have to use the guy he found earlier? However, the other person's body was so unique that Orochimaru was reluctant to give it to Sarutobi Hiruzen. The organization has introduced a new member, the Red Sand Scorpion from the Hidden Sand Village. Amemiya Kenichi briefly recounted the events at the Akatsuki base. Of course, he also focused on Zetsu and Obito, but when mentioning them, he didn't reveal much information. Revealing it now would only serve to provoke the hostility of Black Zetsu and Obito, so it would be better to feign ignorance for the time being. It seems that the organization is pursuing an elite approach. Orochimaru casually burned the unused arm, which was no longer of much value. Amemiya Kenichi remained non-committal. The Akatsuki organization was indeed an elite organization, and their future membership would be limited. He just didn't know who his joining would replace. Of course, there was a possibility that no one would replace them, and new rings would appear in the future. Kenichi, do you think rejection is something that every living being experiences? Orochimaru asked, and Amemiya Kenichi's expression grew more serious. Teacher, it's safe to say that most people will experience immune rejection, but the world is so vast, it's hard to say if there are people who won't experience it at all. Amemiya Kenichi said ambiguously. Rejection is essentially unavoidable, even between highly compatible receptors. This is why there are anti-rejection drugs. So, if someone had absolutely no immune rejection, how many ways could you imagine using them? Orochimaru smiled, then looked intently at his disciple. Clone them first, and if cloning doesn't work, preserve their cells. Such a person would be extremely valuable. Amemiya Kenichi answered without a second thought. Absolutely no immune rejection, what does that even mean? To put it bluntly, for such a person, cloning would be a kindness to their original form. They would become the world's greatest treasure. If we were to elaborate, it would easily lead to the existence of 404. After all, such a person's significance is so immense that even inhumane cloning becomes humane. Of course, this assumes that their tissues wouldn't cause any immune rejection when transplanted. If it simply didn't cause rejection, then their value wouldn't be very high. But it couldn't be said to be completely useless. After all, if all the organs were replaced, what would happen? Just as I thought. Orochimaru smiled with satisfaction, while Amemiya Kenichi was stunned for a moment, then looked at his teacher in disbelief. Teacher, you mean, could it be? Amemiya Kenichi was a little excited. If it was really as he imagined, it would be really cool. Well, I got a very special test subject. Orochimaru's smile became even more unbridled. The appearance of this test subject had made Orochimaru extremely excited. After all, after his disciple raised the issue of allopathic rejection, Orochimaru had already determined that almost all life forms would have rejection, the difference being the severity. But he hadn't expected to find one with absolutely no rejection reaction. Teacher, I think we need to start cloning research as soon as possible, Amemiya Kenichi said seriously. With such a precious test subject, they definitely needed to clone more. Otherwise, how could they conduct research happily? Wouldn't it be a shame to accidentally kill it? It will take some time. Orochimaru shook his head. Cloning was not an easy task and still needed to be perfected. Chapter 68, The Letter from Bozan. Teacher, are you planning to use that person's arm as a transplant for the Sannin? Amemiya Kenichi was assisting Orochimaru. Orochimaru was planning to promote cloning research. He wanted to quickly complete the cloning of that special test subject, so that he could have more users later. Orochimaru had already thought of many uses for that person. For example, Danzo had always complained that his body couldn't handle the strain of the Sharingan, but Orochimaru's tests showed that the test subject was a perfect match for the Sharingan. Giving it to Danzo could also help him swindle some research funds from him. He had so many experiments to conduct that he wouldn't be able to survive without enough money. Yes, the Sannin gave a lot. Orochimaru calmly observed the instruments, then shook his head. The experiment had failed again. Amemiya Kenichi scratched his head. The Sannin actually needed to learn from Danzo. But these two were truly interesting. One had a left hand, the other a right. They were simply perfect. Oh, and there's Kakashi. If Kakashi's eyes were replaced with normal ones, who knows what his future would hold, but Kenichi Amemiya thinks it's highly unlikely. After all, the Sharingan was a relic given to Kakashi by Obito. Given Kakashi's personality, it's impossible for him to give it up, otherwise he would have replaced it long ago. After the cloning experiment failed, Kenichi Amemiya continued his own experiments, aiming to quickly perfect the thermobaric bomb test. If you miss this opportunity, you'll never find another one again. Kenichi Amemiya formed a hand seal, and 3 more Kenichi Amemiya stood beside him. The multiple shadow clone jutsu. Kenichi Amemiya finally mastered this jutsu, arguably the most flawed in the ninja world. His teacher had acquired a trove of jutsu from the Hokage building, including the multiple shadow clone technique. However, this jutsu consumes a lot of chakra, and the more clones he creates, the more fatigued they become upon disbanding. Therefore, his teacher repeatedly warned him against this issue when teaching him. Although Kenichi Amemiya currently possessed a considerable amount of chakra after all, having inherited the sage's body from the first generation, his chakra surpassed Kakashi's by a significant margin. He remained cautious, refraining from creating too many shadow clones. Thank you for your help, we are running out of time. Kenichi Amemiya glanced at his companions, and the other shadow clones nodded. Then, in the laboratory, he began researching the thermobaric explosives. After 7 full days, he finally achieved preliminary results. These past few days of research haven't been without results. At least I've found a combination that's both relatively stable and powerful, Kenichi Amemiya said, a smile playing as he gazed at the thermobaric explosives in his hand. Testing the explosives composition had taken a considerable amount of time, and now he had solved a crucial step in the thermobaric bomb process. He also gained a deeper understanding of multiple shadow clones. The ideas of some in my previous life are no longer feasible. While shadow clones can perform transformation techniques, it's impossible for them to independently address their needs. Kenichi Amemiya stroked his chin. In a previous life, he had read a farcical theory that Kakishi's continued singleness was due to a jutsu combining a self-resolving shadow clone and a transformation technique. Because it was so outrageous, the spokesperson was criticized dozens of times, including some from Kenichi Amemiya. He decided to research it, but found it completely impossible. After all, a shadow clone was a separate self, so such a ridiculous idea was naturally impossible. After solving the thermobaric explosive ratio problem, the next step was to create a thermobaric bomb according to the design. Kenichi Amemiya had originally wanted to make 2, but he only had enough raw materials for 1. A second batch would have been prohibitively expensive. So, he decided to make 1 to test its power and see how effective it was against the ninja world. Kenichi, come and take a look. But before Kenichi Amemiya could even begin to work on the thermobaric bomb, his teacher called him out. As soon as he emerged, Amemiya Kenichi spotted a man standing next to Orochimaru. He lowered his head, a faint look of fear on his face. But what caught Amemiya Kenichi's attention the most was his bald head, not a single hair on his head, and he looked a bit malnourished. Who's this? Amemiya Kenichi said, curiously. He hadn't seen this man before. This is the test subject I told you about before. His body is very special. So far, no part of his body has been rejected by any of the parts I've transplanted, Orochimaru explained enthusiastically. Amemiya Kenichi immediately understood. He didn't recall such a person appearing before, but he held this special test subject in high regard. Looking at the Sharingan implanted in the subject's collarbone, Amemiya Kenichi's expression became complicated. This was the first time he had seen a Sharingan transplanted there. The optic nerve didn't run through the collarbone, though blood vessels could be connected. But Amemiya Kenichi was still curious whether this man could see with this Sharingan. This is Hatsunshin, who volunteered to be a test subject. Orochimaru briefly introduced him. Amemiya Kenichi nodded, then looked at the man before him with interest. He didn't seem to have any special features, and while there was chakra pulsing from him, it didn't seem very strong. So, what's the purpose of calling me here, master? Amemiya Kenichi glanced at Hatsunshin, who lowered his head, not daring to look at him. I need your help, Orochimaru explained simply. Amemiya Kenichi was a little confused. What did he need help with? Master could create shadow clones, and he had even taught him. Wouldn't it be easier to create one? The Sannin wants a complete arm, and he can't wait. You're very knowledgeable about new cells, so I'd like to ask for your opinion. Orochimaru smiled at his disciple. Amemiya Kenichi was stunned for a moment. New cells? But then a thought occurred to him. If he knew anything about new cells, then they would only be cancer cells, right? Amemiya Kenichi glanced at his teacher, who was beaming. Master really cared deeply about the Sannin. The Sannin must have been very touched. At this point, Uchiha Itachi hadn't started causing trouble yet, and Uchiha Shinaya certainly didn't know about Uchiha Itachi, so he didn't change his name for the time being. He couldn't find the original name, so he made up one himself. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69. Someone is really ruthless and dares to use benzene to take a bath. The Sannin Sarutobi Hiruzen naturally wouldn't just casually come to this lab for a transplant, so he opted to have his arm returned to him. This was understandable, though. If Amemiya Kenichi were Sarutobi Hiruzen, he wouldn't have chosen to meet Orochimaru alone, let alone in such an awkward situation as needing a replacement arm. If his previous arm wasn't usable, then forming hand seals with one hand would have some impact on his strength. While it wouldn't have prevented the Sannin from beating up other ninjas, facing a formidable cage-level powerhouse like Orochimaru would have been a real challenge. Teacher, what are your plans? Amemiya Kenichi asked his teacher, who was currently securing the Posenshin to the operating table. The man was trembling, but he remained silent, clenching his teeth. This drew a second glance from Amemiya Kenichi. By then, Amemiya Kenichi knew this man's primary reason for being a test subject was to learn cloning technology. He was a ruthless individual. Amemiya Kenichi admitted he couldn't be so ruthless. Even if he wanted to learn cloning, he could have done it through other means, rather than becoming a test subject himself. See if you can trigger cancer in his arm. Sure enough, the teacher gave an answer he'd expected, leaving Kenichi Amemiya feeling a bit amused. But in his arm, Kenichi Amemiya was a bit perplexed. Most cancers are associated with certain organs, but Kenichi Amemiya had thought of a cancer that seemed quite suitable. The problem was, what were the triggers? Lung cancer is linked to cigarettes, like nicotine and tar, but what about bone cancer? Teacher, do you have any crude oil? Kenichi Amemiya thought of a trigger and quickly asked his teacher. Crude oil? You want that? Orochimaru raised an eyebrow and gave his student a curious look. Kenichi Amemiya nodded. He did intend to get some crude oil, because after processing, benzene can be extracted from it. Benzene itself is a carcinogen and can trigger bone cancer, making it a relatively suitable method. Furthermore, the materials were readily available. After all, in the world of Naruto, there was fuel oil, so crude oil should be available as well. However, after discussing it with his teacher, Kenichi Amemiya realized his folly. If there's fuel in this world, how could there not be benzene? Only, here, people don't call it benzene, they call it sesame oil. Yes, sesame oil. It's even a luxury item reserved for the wealthy, something ordinary people might not even be able to afford. At that moment, Kenichi Amemiya's expression turned like that of an elderly person on the subway. But considering the properties of benzene, it's not surprising that it could be mistaken for sesame oil. After all, at room temperature, it's colorless and has a strong fragrance. How terrifying. Hearing the teacher say that even some wealthy people bathe in benzene, Kenichi Amemiya felt a strong sense of suffocation. Although Kenichi couldn't quite understand why such a fragrance could be used for bathing, wasn't it pungent? But in his previous life, if anyone dared to bathe in benzene, Kenichi Amemiya would have silently called a mental hospital and had the psychopath sent there as soon as possible. But remembering that, when the radioactive element radium was first discovered, people added it to cosmetics as a beauty product, Kenichi Amemiya calmed down. It's likely that, only when the ninja world realizes the dangers of benzene in the future, will this situation be eradicated. However, ninjas generally don't live very long, so it's likely this discovery will take a long time. With benzene, the procedure became much simpler. After administering anesthesia, the teacher made a large incision in Hatsunshin's arm and had Kenichi Amemiya try it out as soon as possible. Although using benzene to induce bone cancer presented some challenges, Kenichi Amemiya, having previously conducted lung cancer research, successfully completed the procedure. Bone cancer was successfully established in Hatsunshin's arm bone. Teacher, I'd like to extract a sample, Kenichi Amemiya said to Orochimaru. After all, this man was a national treasure level experimental subject, a test subject who wouldn't have any rejection reactions, and Kenichi Amemiya was eager to study this type of cancer cell. Orochimaru didn't object, but smoothed his hair and nodded in agreement. However, Kenichi Amemiya gave his teacher a strange look. Was he smoothing his hair just now? That movement sounded rather feminine. Could it be that there was something wrong with the reincarnation? Kenichi Amemiya didn't know, but he silently took note. Perhaps he could try studying his teacher later to find out what was going on. Besides, his teacher didn't seem to notice anything unusual about him. This made Kenichi Amemiya even more cautious. Researching the soul certainly required extreme caution, otherwise, anything could go wrong. Leaving his teacher's operating room, Kenichi Amemiya returned to his own lab. He planned to quickly cultivate the cancer cells while they were still alive. Otherwise, if they died, it would be troublesome. Cancer cells were a scoundrel, skilled at fighting within the human body but incompetent outside. While rampant inside the human body, they were a terminal disease, but outside, they were nothing more than a weakling. Furthermore, most cells and bacteria, when cultured in vitro, were strangely labeled as sluggish and weak, but outside, in the harsh environment, they began to find their own way. After invoking his yang attribute chakra to envelop them, Kenichi Amemiya watched the cancer cells begin to multiply and breathed a sigh of relief. Now, that was enough. Then, Amemiya Kenichi placed the petri dish in a dedicated incubation room and left. He planned to finish the thermobaric bomb first and test its power. As for the chakra-fused thermobaric bomb, he planned to test the power of a regular bomb, before moving on to the chakra-fused thermobaric bomb. With the thermobaric explosives solved, making one wasn't particularly difficult, just follow the blueprints. Is this considered a hand-rolled thermobaric bomb? Amemiya Kenichi wiped the sweat from his forehead, feeling a bit overwhelmed. The industrial system in the Naruto world was also problematic, but with something as unpredictable as chakra and the 3 Megatama Sharingan, Amemiya Kenichi felt he could still make one by hand. He just had to be careful. Don't let it explode in the lab. Looking at the thermobaric explosive before him, Amemiya Kenichi licked his lips. If this thing exploded in the lab, there would be no way to deal with it. Recently, a certain country's room temperature superconductivity has caused chaos around the world. However, whether it is true or not is still being verified, and the current information does not seem to prove its success. Chapter 70. When you write a program full of bugs and find that it unexpectedly works normally, what does it feel like to roll a thermobaric bomb? Kenichi Amemiya didn't know this before, but now that he knows, he has to admit, the feeling is incredible and surprisingly exhilarating. After all, seeing a thermobaric bomb come to life from scratch with his own hands is quite rewarding. The only problem is that it's a bit rough, as Kenichi Amemiya doesn't have any professional machine tools. Achieving high precision is also very difficult, but thankfully, with the help of chakra and the Sharingan, Kenichi Amemiya has managed to successfully roll a thermobaric bomb. High altitude bombing is difficult. Jumping too high with this thing is too difficult. Kenichi Amemiya shook his head, looking at the bomb in his hand. The lightest thermobaric bomb weighs 5 tons, which is a staggering amount. However, the good news is that it can be sealed with a scroll, which means that the thermobaric bomb won't be so heavy. Kenichi Amemiya had also finished setting up the fuse, a crude, handmade button. Pressing it would detonate the thermobaric bomb within 10 seconds, setting off the first dazzling fireworks display in the ninja world. Then I'll just have to get away from it as quickly as possible after dropping it. While the explosives here only weigh about 4.5 tons, the thermobaric bomb's power is roughly equivalent to about 40 tons of TNT. Kenichi Amemiya stroked his chin, then carefully placed the thermobaric bomb inside the sealing scroll. He then lifted the light scroll, weighed it, and nodded in satisfaction. This thing was a barely reproducible replica, though, judging by its industrial quality, it was a product that would have sent even the military workers of his past life into a state of panic. After all, there was no quality control, no qualified production line, and even the metal casing was hand-rolled by Kenichi Amemiya, leaving it somewhat rough. But in this world, where industrial production lines were still a distant memory, a thermobaric bomb like this was already the limit. The fact that it was even able to be built without exploding was a testament to Kenichi Amemiya's exceptional skill, and of course, his Sharingan, which could function as a microscope, also played a significant role. This was a thermobaric bomb imbued with the hallmarks of the ninja world, and the full industrialization and millimeter-level precision of its craftsmanship were undoubtedly the hallmarks of Kenichi Amemiya. At this moment, Kenichi Amemiya noticed his ring growing slightly warm, and a sudden realization struck him. Nagato was pulling him into that mysterious dimension. Is a meeting coming up? Kenichi Amemiya scratched his head. It seemed like a meeting was coming, but it had been a while since one, and he wondered what Nagato was planning this time. At this thought, Kenichi Amemiya's mind and body were absorbed, and when he opened his eyes again, he found himself in the mysterious dimension he had been in. He glanced around. His teacher was there, to his left, and to his right, a familiar figure. The figure waved upon seeing him, and Kenichi Amemiya instantly understood. This must be Sasori. Then there were 3 other people in the space, Nagato and Konan, and a unique figure. Though the other person didn't look special, Amemiya Kenichi recognized him by his build. Kakuzu. Let's organize the groups this time. This new member, Kita, will work with you, Sora. Nagato spoke immediately after everyone arrived. Otherwise, letting Amemiya Kenichi speak might cause the meeting to be unable to continue. Oh. Orochimaru glanced at the new member, who was also looking at him. Their eyes met, then they turned away. Ayo, you and you will be in the same group, Nagato continued. This was what he had planned beforehand. The Akatsuki members would be divided into pairs. He had originally planned to assign the new member, Kakuzu, to Amemiya Kenichi, since Sasori seemed to get along well with him, but considering Kakuzu was a normal person, he abandoned the idea. He didn't want Amemiya Kenichi to lead Kakuzu astray again. That would be really troublesome. Okay, pain, Amemiya Kenichi said with a smile, and Konan covered her face. Here he is again. If Akatsuki weren't so small now, with every member so important, Konan felt Nagato would have kicked him out long ago. Kakuzu glanced at Amemiya Kenichi, then at the leader beside him, a hint of amusement in his eyes. He remembered the leader's previous statement that everyone in the organization should address each other by their names. Kakuzu had been curious about the reason, and now he seemed to understand. Amemiya Kenichi, I'm looking forward to your research results. Nagato wasn't angry, more accurately, he was numb. This guy was like a brainless person. He couldn't understand what he was saying, so he simply kept silent. However, Nagato's profound words did make Amemiya Kenichi's expression grow slightly more serious. Oh my six paths sage, I swear I forgot. I swear on my next door neighbor, Uncle Sam's leather shoes. Ahem, I was researching something else. I'll get to that soon. Amemiya Kenichi coughed awkwardly. He'd been busy working on thermobaric bombs. The good news was that they were now finished. The bad news was that research on things like hybrid rice hadn't even begun. They hadn't even created a folder yet. Thankfully, Nagato didn't say anything. Instead, he assigned a few tasks and disbanded the group. The tasks were simple enough. Sensei and Kakuzu were responsible for raising money, ideally completing bounty-laden missions. Since the Akatsuki wasn't yet a target for ninja intelligence organizations, completing bounty-laden missions was the most convenient way. As for Kenichi Amemiya and Sasori, Nagato assigned them a mission to observe a renegade ninja named Biwajuzo in the Land of Water to see if he was qualified to join the Akatsuki. If so, they would recommend him to the Rain Village in the Land of Rain. If not, they would kill him and collect the bounty to help fund the organization. Biwajuzo, I think he's one of the 7 ninja swordsmen. Kenichi Amemiya scratched his head. He'd only heard the name, but wasn't sure of his specific abilities. He hadn't expected to be tasked with recruiting new members, but he remembered that Biwajuzo hadn't been among the Akatsuki members. Perhaps he wasn't recognized, or perhaps he died after joining. But that didn't concern him. He just needed to find him and observe him. A complete industrialized system was too difficult, so for now, he could only use cheats and rough builds. Chapter 71 Scorpion. Yes, it's normal that I made a Unit 01 with my own hands, right? Kenichi, you're here. An excited voice called out. Amemiya Kenichi glanced up. It was Sasori. Sasori looked the same, but Amemiya Kenichi noticed he was holding a sealing scroll, his eyes gleaming with excitement. He wondered what had happened. Scorpio, did you hear the leader's mission? Amemiya Kenichi yawned. He had come to the Rain Village specifically to reunite with Sasori. After all, his laboratory was in the Land of Fire, and if Sasori entered, it would be troublesome. If he were discovered, it would inevitably alert Konoha, as Sasori was a renowned ninja in the Sand Village. Furthermore, Konoha and the Land of Fire were on edge right now. If Sasori were discovered, it would inevitably raise suspicions that the Sand Village was planning something against Konoha. If the war escalated, it would be a disaster. That wouldn't be just a simple butterfly effect, it could rewrite the history of the ninja world. Yes, observed Biwajuzo. At the mention of the leader's mission, Sasori's expression grew slightly more serious. But let's not talk about that, Kenichi. Look at this puppet I made. But Scorpion quickly waved his hand, his expression nonchalant. He unfurled the scroll in his hand, and a puppet dropped from it. Amemiya Kenichi examined it curiously. It was a fully metal puppet, enormous. Even lying on the ground, it looked over 2 meters tall. What is this? Amemiya Kenichi glanced at Scorpion. This guy's execution was incredible. In just a few days, he'd created a prototype. I call this Unit 01. It's a metal puppet I developed, based on your theories. Scorpion manipulated the giant creature to its feet. over 2 meters tall. Its all-metal body looked quite intimidating, but once it stood up, Amemiya Kenichi noticed it seemed a bit bulkier. Its waist was almost a meter thick. And was the name Unit 01 serious? Amemiya Kenichi felt a breath catch in his chest, unsure how to complain. Will there be Unit 2 and Unit 3 in the future? How's its combat power? However, Kenichi Amemiya is more concerned about this issue. After all, the most important thing in the ninja world is combat power. If you don't have combat power, you can't do anything. This thing can only become a qualified puppet if it has enough combat power. Otherwise, this thing has no special use. It is just a tank to attract fire, right? I tested it. The ability to withstand attacks is very good. The sensitivity will increase with the increase of chakra consumption. If you want to achieve the sensitivity of an ordinary puppet. Scorpion's expression became more serious when mentioning his puppet. That will require almost twice the chakra consumption of an ordinary puppet, and this thing does not have the ability to release ninjutsu. It can only be used for close combat. Scorpion waved his hand. Kenichi Amemiya lost much interest after hearing this. Although the physical skills are also very good in the ninja world, if this thing does not have the ability to release ninjutsu, then its combat power will be greatly reduced. However, watching Sasori's excitement, Amemiya Kenichi felt that Sasori was truly a gifted ninja. After all, he had single-handedly created a Gundam, not something that many could achieve. With further improvements, a more powerful puppet would likely emerge. I remember some metals can conduct chakra. You might try using that metal later. It would also improve the defense against ninjutsu. Amemiya Kenichi and Sasori chatted happily. Back in the rain village, Nagato watched the scene with his arms folded. He suddenly felt a surge of regret. If he had known Amemiya Kenichi could lead others astray, he should have rejected his request to join the Akatsuki. However, the other party was quite powerful, possessing the powerful ability of Sage Mode. This had also helped Nagato realize the Hungry Ghost Realm's weakness in chakra absorption. Nagato, is it really okay to ignore that guy? Konan glanced at her friend. Well, although he looks unreliable, at least he's completing the organization's missions well. Nagato nodded. As long as he could complete the organization's mission and possessed a certain level of strength, that was enough. Kenichi Amemiya had no idea what Nagato thought of him. Although he vaguely sensed he was being observed, he didn't care. He hadn't done anything wrong. While discussing his inspiration and ideas for the Gundam with Sasori, Kenichi Amemiya followed Sasori as they slowly headed towards the land of water. The land of fire separated the land of water and the land of rain, which was a bit of a hassle. Fortunately, Kenichi Amemiya mastered the art of erasing faces, so he also helped Sasori change his face. The two of them successfully made their way into the land of fire. Kenichi, your jutsu is quite powerful, Sasori said, stroking his face. He now looked like a middle-aged man, a complete departure from his former self. Not bad, a simple and practical jutsu. Kenichi Amemiya smiled. His teacher's jutsu was truly powerful. It was a shame he couldn't read the other person's memories, otherwise the disguise would have been more perfect. Konoha. After entering the land of fire, Scorpion's eyes grew colder. Amemiya Kenichi knew the truth. After all, Scorpion's parents had died at the hands of Konoha's hero, Konoha White Fang. Scorpion, we need to complete our mission first, Amemiya Kenichi warned Scorpion. If Scorpion excitedly rushed to Konoha to cause trouble, it would attract Konoha's attention and cause trouble. The Akatsuki had been very low-key in its early days, giving off the impression of mercenaries, not revealing its purpose of capturing the tailed beasts of the ninja world. If that were revealed, let alone hired, the first priority of the 5 great ninja villages would likely be to eliminate the Akatsuki. I know. Scorpion took a deep breath, then quickly followed Amemiya Kenichi through the dense forest. It would be difficult to encounter Konoha ninjas in the land of fire at this time, as friction with the hidden cloud village was growing, and even small-scale local conflicts had already occurred. However, the battlefield was not yet large, and the fighting was only in a small country between the land of fire and the land of lightning, so it had not yet expanded to the mainland. It seems that when we return, we should be able to drop a thermobaric bomb on the battlefield. Amemiya Kenichi glanced in the direction of Konoha. He missed his little home in Konoha. I just don't know what happened to that little home now. I guess it has been confiscated by the village? Chapter 72. What was the reason for the destruction of the Whirlpool country? Reaching the land of water isn't an easy task. After all, its geography is exceptional, surrounded by sea, and without any land borders. Therefore, reaching the land of water requires a boat trip. However, upon arriving at the port, Kenichi Amemiya and his companions unexpectedly received a new intelligence report. Has Biwajuzo left the land of water for the land of whirlpools? Kenichi Amemiya touched the ring in his hand. It was a message from their leader, Nagato. Reliable intelligence indicated that Biwajuzo had left the land of water and was likely in the land of whirlpools, but his current activities there were unknown. Nagato instructed him and Sasori to check. The land of whirlpools is quite close. After these past few days of communication, Kenichi Amemiya and Sasori had grown closer, and Sasori was now speaking more casually. Yes, it's quite close, but the land of whirlpools has been destroyed. I don't know what Biwajuzo was doing there. Kenichi Amemiya frowned. The Uzumaki country technically had a cooperative relationship with Konoha. Even the four head protectors of Konoha ninjas bore the Uzumaki clan's insignia. However, the Uzumaki country was ultimately destroyed by ninjas wary of their sealing techniques. It's unclear what Konoha did during this period, and Amemiya Kenichi never asked his teacher about it. However, the Uzumaki country was undoubtedly destroyed, and the Uzumaki clan has now become extremely rare. It's easy to say that this is the nature of the ninja world. Aside from powerful ninja groups like the 5 great nations and the Akatsuki, smaller nations often fade away over time and don't have much of a role to play. Their only appearances are casual mentions by major characters. Maybe they are planning to go to the Uzumaki country to pan for gold. After all, the Uzumaki clan's sealing techniques are powerful, and there's no telling if they might have missed some treasures, Sasori said, fiddling with his metal puppet. His recent conversations with Amemiya Kenichi have given Sasori more ideas. He plans to try to modify his Unit 01 to see if he can enhance its capabilities. Of course, chakra transmission was definitely necessary, but that would require sufficient materials. I remember the ninja swordsman's weapons possessing transmission capabilities, Scorpion pondered. Amemiya Kenichi remained non-committal. Since the leader had spoken, he decided to go and take a look. He suspected this information likely came from Black Zetsu, as he was an intelligence officer within the Akatsuki. He could also look for the death mask revered by the Uzumaki clan. He remembered that, after performing the powerful Shiki Fujin, the soul would be trapped within the belly of the death god. The death mask was then needed to break the seal, a method that involved a rather arduous Caesarean section. The price of this was the death of the person breaking the seal, so perhaps the teacher was the only one in the ninja world who was best suited to breaking the death god seal. In the future, the teacher will also be affected, but only if the plan is truly carried out, and the Sannin can withstand it. Sitting on the boat, Amemiya Kenichi surveyed the island before him, and scratched his head. However, if the teacher really fell victim, it would be a good opportunity for a search. Kenichi Amemiya was quite interested in the jutsu of corpse reincarnation. This wasn't to say he intended to achieve immortality through this jutsu, he simply wanted to understand its workings, and where the souls that had taken over the body went. Then he could say to his teacher, "Teacher, you don't want to be unable to recover your hands forever, do you?" Although this statement seemed a bit strange. Kenichi Amemiya and Sasori soon stood on the land of the Whirlpool country. At that moment, the Whirlpool country looked like any other uninhabited island, perfectly peaceful. After all, the journey from the land of fire to the Whirlpool country was quite fast, and there were many boats going there. According to the boatman, people often went there to shop and have fun, but those who did usually hired ninjas. Kenichi Amemiya had seen similar escort missions at the Konoha Mission Center, so it wasn't surprising. Given the current tensions between Konoha and the Hidden Cloud Village, Kenichi Amemiya felt that the mission gathering hall had likely begun accepting only high-paying missions, and that the ruins of Whirlpool country probably wouldn't be crowded. This place would be quite suitable for a laboratory. Kenichi Amemiya scratched his head, surveying the deserted Whirlpool country. He had previously considered building the laboratory directly within the Kamo dimension, but with Obito still alive, he abandoned that idea. Now, Kenichi Amemiya felt that setting up the laboratory in Whirlpool Country was a good option. After all, the small island of Whirlpool Country was rarely visited, making it somewhat secluded. However, it was a bit far. While safety would be guaranteed in Rain Country, there was a high probability that Black Zetsu or Nagato would occasionally wander in, making it impossible to conduct secret experiments. Architecture can't be eternal. After all, only puppetry is the eternal art form. Sasori suddenly sighed. Kenichi Amemiya gave him a strange look, then looked back at the dilapidated buildings before him. He felt that, if the Whirlpool Country hadn't been attacked by the enemy, perhaps many of its buildings would still be preserved. Let's go, Sasori. Our target is Biwajuzo. He should be on this island, Amemiya Kenichi shouted, and then he let go of his mind. The next second, streaks of lightning appeared in the corners of his eyes. Sasori, standing nearby, looked curiously at Amemiya Kenichi's sudden facial tattoo, but didn't ask any further questions. Many ninjas valued the concealment of their ninjutsu, and would not easily reveal it. After all, the ninja's battle was a battle of intelligence, a fact ingrained in every ninja. If Jiraiya had known his disciple's abilities, perhaps the outcome of the battle would have been different. Yes, Sasori said silently, following Amemiya Kenichi. The two of them quickly traveled through the corners of Whirlpool Country. Soon, Amemiya Kenichi and Sasori stopped, having spotted the man resting by the water Biwajuzo. By this time, Amemiya Kenichi and Sasori had both shed their disguises and returned to their true forms, donning Akatsuki uniforms. This guy looks pretty confident, Amemiya Kenichi observed the calm Biwajuzo before him, rubbing his chin. Let me try first, Sasori said, pulling out his Unit 01. Someone had already replicated the LK-99 material, sending US stocks soaring 130%. At worst, this thing was probably a new antimagnetic material. If it were truly a room temperature superconductor, it would be incredibly dangerous. Chapter 73 Biwajuzo, why don't you ask me if I want to join Akatsuki? Wait. The leader wants us to recruit people. Amemiya Kenichi quickly grabbed Sasori, who was standing by. This wasn't some weird, hot-blooded anime where they had to fight before talking. But then, Amemiya Kenichi froze for a moment. Recalling the plot of Naruto, it seemed that persuasion often began after a fight, so a fight before recruiting seemed possible. But the commotion was clearly enough to attract Biwajuzo's attention. He was certainly a capable ninja, so Amemiya Kenichi and Sasori left together. Amemiya Kenichi, Konoha's A-rank renegade ninja, and Sasori, the S-rank renegade ninja from the Sand Village. What are you doing here? Biwajuzo narrowed his eyes, recognizing the two men before him. Biwajuzo, our leader believes you have what it takes to join our organization, so he asked us to invite you to join the Akatsuki, Amemiya Kenichi said directly. While fighting wasn't out of the question, it would be too much trouble. Akatsuki? Biwajuzo had clearly never heard of the organization, his expression still wary. Well, they're planning to gather the tailed beasts from the major ninja villages to achieve peace in the ninja world. Amemiya Kenichi shrugged, then casually repeated Nagato's words. By this time, however, Scorpion was already prepared for battle. After all, while Akatsuki's goal might sound a bit ridiculous, their leader, possessing the Sage's Eye, certainly possessed the ability. If the target refused to join, the best strategy would be to silence them and prevent the organization's information from leaking. Collecting tailed beasts. Biwajuzo's eyes narrowed. This organization, of which he had never heard, was incredibly arrogant, even talking about gathering tailed beasts. Looking at Biwajuzo's expression, Amemiya Kenichi felt helpless. It seemed a fight was necessary, and it was a good opportunity to observe whether Biwajuzo had the strength to join Akatsuki. Although this guy didn't seem to appear in Akatsuki in the future, it was hard to say whether he died after joining. Kenichi, do you know about his sword? Scorpion suddenly whispered to Amemiya Kenichi. Yes, the beheading sword. I heard it can absorb the enemy's blood and repair itself. It's also rumored to have the effect of restoring physical strength. Amemiya Kenichi nodded. Of course he knew about the sword. Even though Amemiya Kenichi wasn't a veteran anime fan who'd studied these minor characters before, After arriving in this world, he did have some knowledge of the renowned 7 ninja swordsmen. These things were no secret in the ninja world. After all, as the renowned elite team of the Hidden Mist Village, the other ninja villages would surely want to strip them of their underwear. Keeping it a secret would be impossible, unless they killed every enemy in every battle, otherwise it would be impossible. I want that sword, to use on my Unit 01. Scorpion was very outspoken, but Amemiya Kenichi was used to his personality. To put it bluntly, the current Scorpion isn't the Scorpion of the future. The current Scorpion is more direct, less savvy about socializing. He simply does what he wants, and he does it directly, a very straightforward person. Meanwhile, a thick fog began to gather around them, and Biwajuzo vanished. Biwajuzo wasn't an idiot. He knew from Scorpion's words that this matter wouldn't end peacefully, so he naturally decided to strike first. Alright, then, I'll get it for you to study, Amemiya Kenichi said indifferently. Nagato hadn't mandated Biwajuzo's recruitment, and if he was killed due to his lack of skill, he couldn't blame anyone else. Senjutsu chakra gathered in Amemiya Kenichi's mouth, and he opened it, unleashing a massive burst of flames at the dense fog before him. The scorching heat instantly vaporized the mist, forming water vapor. Simultaneously, a water dragon rushed forward, colliding with the flames from Amemiya Kenichi's mouth, causing the water vapor to rapidly spread and diffuse. Scorpion had no intention of standing by and watching. This was his first time working with Amemiya Kenichi, so he naturally wanted to demonstrate his prowess. So, right off the bat, Scorpion unleashed all his puppets, though their number was small, only a mere 20 or so, not yet reaching the level of a future 100 unit exercise. No one spoke during the battle, no one called out jutsu names. Amemiya Kenichi watched as Biwajuzo wielded his beheading sword and slashed at the foremost Unit 01, leaving a thin, neither deep nor shallow cut. It seems your Unit 01 needs some strengthening, Amemiya Kenichi shrugged, looking at Biwajuzo besieged by a swarm of puppets. He could certainly use some Senjutsu right now. The Senjutsu, Heiouhoonique, he'd just used to disperse the fog and attack simultaneously, but that was an area of effect attack. Using it now would likely incinerate Scorpion's puppets. Yes, so we need more high quality metal. Scorpion remained expressionless. Unit 01 was an experimental unit, primarily used for testing, and the primary target was the third Kazukage's human puppets. 3 Magatama began to spin in Amemiya Kenichi's eyes. He looked at Biwajuzo before him, learning some ninjutsu he hadn't mastered yet. However, he soon realized that Biwajuzo relied primarily on ninjutsu, which wasn't very helpful to Amemiya Kenichi. So, he decided to quickly deal with Biwajuzo and take the vortex sword. He still needed to search for the death mask in the land of whirlpools. He was very interested in the death god. Scorpion, leave a path for me, Amemiya Kenichi said to Scorpion, and then he gathered a ball of lightning chakra in his hand, but this time it was red and black. Scorpion was stunned for a moment. He had seen lightning of this color before, and it left a deep impression on him. Before Scorpion could ask anything, Amemiya Kenichi had already vanished from his sight. Really quick thinking, Amemiya Kenichi exclaimed as he watched Biwajuzo block his Senjutsu Chidori with a vortex sword. However, a large hole had been pierced through the beheading sword, and even the metal nearby had turned red and softened due to the high temperature. In order to block the attack, Scorpion seized the opportunity and pierced Biwajuzo's abdomen with the Sandan triangular pyramid of the third Kazakage. Cough. Biwajuzo spat out a mouthful of blood. However, Biwajuzo was also a smart man. He immediately let go of the beheading sword and wanted to leave the battlefield. Don't be in a hurry to leave. Amemiya Kenichi smiled and mobilized a large amount of lightning attribute chakra. He once again condensed Chidori and, in conjunction with Scorpion's puppet, struck Biwajuzo through the chest. Chapter 74, a wall full of death masks. Here's the beheading sword. Kenichi Amemiya threw the beheading sword to Scorpion. Scorpion rarely smiled. Not to mention that Scorpion's smile at this moment still felt like a young idol. Apart from anything else, Scorpion's appearance is still very good. If it were in his previous life, he would at least be regarded as a brother in the eyes of fans. Looking at the lifeless Biwajuzo on the ground, Kenichi Amemiya scratched his head. This guy's strength was actually not bad, but at most he was at the level of an elite jonin. It was not surprising that he died at the hands of himself and Scorpion. Although he used to think that elite jonin were very strong, Kenichi Amemiya now felt that he could probably kill an elite jonin in a single fight. If the Sage Mode and the Sharingan couldn't kill him, he could really just find a piece of tofu to kill himself. Kenichi, why is your lightning black and red? Scorpion inserted the beheading sword into Biwajuzo's chest, used Biwajuzo's blood to repair the damage on the blade, and asked Kenichi Amemiya at the same time. I don't know, but my lightning is this color when I enter this state. Amemiya Kenichi shrugged, then began to search the corpse. Biwajuzo didn't have much on him, but he found a sealed scroll containing a considerable amount of money. He counted it, and found it was around 30 million ryo. For a renegade ninja who had recently defected from the village, this was a considerable sum. For Amemiya Kenichi, it was a windfall. He had already decided what experimental equipment to buy, and planned to set up his own laboratory as soon as possible. Scorpion looked at his companion thoughtfully. He remembered that the monster he had seen earlier was also made of black and red lightning, and had caused considerable damage. He instinctively thought that this companion might have been responsible. Let's go. It's a rare trip to Whirlpool Country. I want to find something here. Amemiya Kenichi called to Scorpion. With Scorpion's help, the search should be quick, especially since it was a mask. Kenichi Amemiya only remembered that the death mask was found in the land of whirlpools, but he couldn't recall the exact location. He only remembered that it seemed to be found in a building surrounded by trees. Scorpion didn't ask any further questions. After watching Kenichi Amemiya burn Biwajuzo's body with his fire style, he followed Kenichi Amemiya away. Kenichi, why did you burn Biwajuzo's body? Scorpion couldn't help but ask. Kenichi Amemiya glanced at his companion, and could understand why Scorpion asked. After all, cremation wasn't a common practice in the ninja world. Burial was still the norm. This issue also contributed to Kabuto Yakushi's later release of So Many People in the Impure World Reincarnation. If cremation had been common, there probably wouldn't have been so much trouble. It's convenient. I'm too lazy to dig graves. But now that the Impure World Reincarnation technique was in his hands, Kenichi Amemiya naturally didn't want to cause trouble, so he made up a random excuse. Who knows if he'll ever be able to cosplay as a necromancer, making a bunch of dead ninjas appear with a wave of his hand, and then accurately targeting them in combat. For example, if a conflict arose with Konoha, targeting the 5th Hokage, at Tsunade, he could easily dispatch the Impure World Reincarnation Cage, Katodan and Naoki, to fight Tsunade, then secretly arrange for a surprise attack. If facing Naruto, the Chosen One, the 4th Hokage and Uzumaki Kushina would be good options, but they would need to be restrained immediately upon emergence, otherwise they might figure out how to undo the Impure World Reincarnation. He did retain some of the tissue from these ninjas, and when dealing with Biwajuzo, Amemiya Kenichi also cut off a finger from his hand. Biwajuzo was quite capable, and could potentially be used as a member of the Impure World Reincarnation in the future. The land of whirlpools wasn't very large, and after Amemiya Kenichi and Sasori traveled around it, they found several buildings that met Amemiya's expectations. After exploring them, Amemiya finally saw the death mask. So many? Amemiya Kenichi looked at the death masks hanging on the wall. They looked like ordinary masks, but they were permeated with an ominous aura of chakra. Upon closer inspection, Amemiya Kenichi discovered that they bore some resemblance to Hanai masks. These masks seemed to be connected to the soul. Sasori looked at the masks before him, rubbing his chin with curiosity. Maybe they possess some special abilities, Amemiya Kenichi mused. These masks were created by the Uzumaki clan after they used the Shikifujin. The souls of the Yondaime and the Kyuubi should be within one of them. Of course, there are also theories that these masks represent different gods, but Amemiya Kenichi finds this theory unreliable. If true, the Uzumaki clan would be incredibly powerful. Amemiya Kenichi had never had his soul sealed by the Shikifujin, so he couldn't tell whose aura these souls belonged to. His teacher's hands were sealed, so he could sense his soul's aura. Thus, he found the corresponding death mask. Without hesitation, Kenichi Amemiya took all the death masks. After all, they were valuable research materials, and studying them wouldn't necessarily translate into studying the death god. The death god must be real. After all, he didn't look like a static program. Instead, he seemed to possess his own intelligence and personality. Kenichi Amemiya had long been curious about the existence of the death god. After all, the impure world reincarnation jutsu, which summons souls from the pure land, couldn't be summoned while trapped within the death god's stomach. Furthermore, currently, once trapped within the death god's stomach, it seemed impossible to escape. Konoha's fourth Hokage would often conduct team building activities within the death god's stomach, but none of them escaped, requiring Orochimaru to free them. So Kenichi Amemiya was curious, was the death god a sealing technique or a summoning technique? It was just that the Shikigami sealed and summoned spirits that were the very beings of the death god. Scorpion, by the way, are there any rumors or records of gods in the Sand Village? Kenichi Amemiya expressed a certain curiosity about the gods of this world. First, there are definitely gods in the world of Naruto. This goes without saying. Didn't Hiden join a cult? He was also endowed with immortality, which allowed him to form an immortal duo with Kokuzu. So, evil gods definitely exist. Regarding room temperature superconductivity, we are still lacking an authoritative media outlet to offer a definitive conclusion. Experiments are still underway. Diamagnetism is present, but is it superconductivity? It's still under investigation. After all, being the first to say it's not, and then someone else demonstrating it later, would be embarrassing. Therefore, foreign research institutions haven't yet given a clear yes or no. Chapter 75. Where is the best place to test thermobaric bombs? Yes, but it's all from stories. Scorpion looked at the mask in his hand. He could sense something within it, but it was unclear, like a thick fog. He quickly responded to Amemiya Kenichi's question. What god? Amemiya Kenichi was curious. Konoha's stories didn't mention gods, only the godlike Six Paths Sage. The god of the desert. Legend has it that the deserts of the Wind Country were created by the god of the desert as punishment for greed. Scorpion blurted out. He'd heard this story often as a child. Amemiya Kenichi's expression was a bit strange. He almost thought it was some kind of desert death god, like Nasus, the desert death god who counted experience as victory from the dog-headed Barbro's mouth. Are there any temples or shrines? Amemiya Kenichi looked around. There was nothing else there, just the death god masks enshrined there. It was probably a place specifically for storing the masks. This struck Amemiya Kenichi as a bit of a pity. He'd been thinking about searching the area to see if he could find a scroll pertaining to the Shikifujin sealing technique, perhaps even learning it. There's a temple, but hardly anyone goes there. Scorpion shook his head. The desert god was just a legend. Even the Six Paths Sage was far more credible. While there were still many records of the Six Paths Sage, the desert god was a completely mythical entity. Scorpion even suspected this desert god might be a fabrication. But then Scorpion sensed something, and looked at Amemiya Kenichi. Kenichi, do you believe gods are real? Scorpion peeked. Although he didn't believe in gods, the desert god was hailed as an eternal, unchanging being, a true eternity. I've heard that in some parts of the ninja world, an evil deity is enshrined. Those who believe in it, and receive its favor can gain immortality. Amemiya Kenichi nodded. Gods definitely exist, but they might not be the all-knowing and omnipotent gods of past lives. At the very least, these gods are only slightly stronger than ordinary ninjas, but certainly not invincible. Otherwise, what would the Satsuki clan even be? Even Kenichi Amemiya doubted whether these gods could defeat the Satsuki clan. Probably not, otherwise the Satsuki clan wouldn't have planted the sacred tree in this place. Is there such a thing? Sasori was clearly intrigued. Kenichi Amemiya wasn't particularly interested. After all, finding the evil god wouldn't be easy. While he knew the evil god's follower, Hiden, would join the Akatsuki in the future, he couldn't remember where Hiden was before. It would be better to wait until Hiden joined before researching. Besides, Kenichi Amemiya already had a number of research projects on his plate. Chakra temperature pressure bombs, crop modification, the EVA 01 modification he'd discussed with Sasori, and now there was the death mask. It was clear that Kenichi Amemiya had little time for research on the death mask and the evil god in the short term. In order of priority, crop transformation was urgent, while the chakra thermobaric bomb could be delayed. The EVA 01 transformation he discussed with Sasori could be left to Sasori. So, upon returning, Kenichi Amemiya planned to first test the thermobaric bomb's effectiveness before moving on to crop transformation. The ninja world is so vast, there's bound to be many strange things. Kenichi Amemiya smiled, then left with Sasori, ready to leave the land of whirlpools. The attempt to recruit Juzo Biwa had failed. His strength was clearly unsuitable for joining the Akatsuki organization. He couldn't even withstand the siege of himself and Sasori. He was a complete scumbag. Of course, as one of the 7 ninja swordsmen, Juzo Biwa had some strength, but it was certainly not exceptional. Kenichi Amemiya didn't immediately return to the Land of Fire. He was considering testing the effectiveness of his bomb on the battlefields of Kumogakure and Konoha, but it wouldn't be a good idea to waste it. So, Kenichi Amemiya rubbed his ring and contacted Nagato. "Tama, what do you want to talk to me about?" Nagato's voice soon emanated from the ring. Originally, Nagato could have used the phantom body technique to pull Amemiya Kenichi into that dimension, but he didn't want to see him, so he simply established a voice communication channel. "Captain Pain, I'd like to ask, has the organization accepted any war missions from Kumogakure or Konoha?" Amemiya Kenichi's goal was to have Kumogakure and Konoha shoulder some of the losses. Amemiya Kenichi remembered that the Akatsuki had accepted many missions, including similar war missions, to help the other side gain an advantage, much like a mercenary organization. The organization does accept war missions issued by Konoha, offering bounties on Kumogakure ninjas, with payouts based on kills. Nagato was silent for a moment, but then he finally spoke. The Akatsuki did accept war missions. After all, a detonation tag could be worth a fortune. "Okay, I understand." Amemiya Kenichi nodded. Just as he'd expected, Konoha had indeed issued a bounty on Kumogakure. But that's understandable. After all, if you can just spend money to eliminate a large number of enemies, it's still very cost effective. Ninjas are expendable, but having a large stockpile of them is a testament to one's strength. If you're going on a war mission, remember to keep your credentials, Nagato warned. It was rare for Amemiya Kenichi to want to do something genuine for the organization, so he couldn't let his confidence down, right? "Okay, I'm going to the Land of Lightning right now." Amemiya Kenichi smiled, then cut off communication with Nagato. It was time to make some money. Since he'd already decided to build his own laboratory as quickly as possible, making money was essential. Turning in a portion of it would be enough to settle the matter. "Are we going to the Land of Lightning, Kenichi?" Scorpion had naturally heard it, and he thought his friend was a bit crazy. He actually dared to go to the Land of Lightning to cause trouble? That was the headquarters of the Hidden Cloud Village. "Well, after we've confirmed the damage, we can leave." Amemiya Kenichi smiled, touching his sealing scroll. He had originally wanted to place it in the center of the war, but there were too many ninja there, making it hard to make money. Amemiya Kenichi was stunned for a moment. If he threw it in the center of the battlefield, wouldn't he be able to collect the reward from both sides? But thinking that the Akatsuki organization had taken on Konoha's mission after all, Amemiya Kenichi had no choice but to give up this tempting idea. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.